Alrighty, should be live now. Just gonna wait for some people to get into the stream. I know we're starting just a little bit earlier than expected. I'm going to do another stream going over the decks that I have in my collection. So for anyone watching the playback of the live stream later, that's what we're doing today. Obviously there's gonna be some delay for the first 5 minutes or so as I wait for people to come in. Do a bit of a better angle this time on the camera, which should be a nice improvement. And yeah, looks like just gotta wait for people to come in and then we'll get started with this. So appreciate everyone for tuning into the stream when you do. Very much appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy Saturdays, whether they be living in the snow area or in somewhere else where it's not getting snowed in right now. I apologize for any background noise because my current place does not have very good sound insulation. So unfortunately, that is just what happens when you live in a place with broken windows. But we'll get started here pretty soon. So for the first couple minutes, I'll just show off some pretty cards while we're waiting. And then we'll get into the deck collection portion once we get some more people in. So we'll start just by going over some pretty cards that are in my cube, because that just seems like something to do in the meantime while we're waiting. Figure I'll just show a few cube cards. We'll start probably about 3:05, so about 3 minutes from now we'll start going through the actual deck collection. But I do have a 2-player cube. I'm only going to play it one more time, so you only get to see these cards together actually once. All these beautiful reverse hollow cards that are in my 2-player cube. Lots of really cool league promos and reverse hollows and all kinds of fun stuff in there. Does the sound work? Just wondering for anyone in the stream, if someone could comment and just make sure the sound's working, that'd be awesome. I'm just going to just slowly fan through the cube cards while we wait for people to get in there and get into the stream. We have U-turn board. I really like that one. Lots of reverses. I tried to make my cube with no holofoil, no like secret rare cards, just reverse holofoil and holofoil. Flood asks 2009 when? We will be doing 2009 today. That will be the first format I go over the decks for. It says stopped at 2008, unfortunately. So sounds like it's good. That's excellent. So we'll get started in about 2 minutes. Just gonna fan again through some of the cards for something to look at. So some pretty reverse hollow and hollow cards from the cube. It is a bit of a shame that I'm taking the cube apart, but I just don't ever play it, so I'll get to use these cards in actual retro decks. Some of the cards, like this Pokemon fan club, are very, very expensive. This fan club was like a $40 card. Just absolutely ridiculous. And some of them are like, a couple dollar foils, right? Some of them went up a lot, like Town Map. And some of them actually got on deals, like this Desert Shaman and this Lynette's Net Search. I got these for both very cheap, despite being very expensive reverse hollows. So looks like we're getting to about 3:05, so I'll put away the cube. That's enough fooling around with all of my shiny cards in there. And I will get going on 2009, which is where we stopped off. Last time I had to end stream a little bit early. I plan on going for longer. However, I ended up getting an important phone call that has pretty much decided my last 2 weeks of my life. So a little bit awkward there, but this time should be able to go for a little bit longer for the stream. Going to try to get through all of 2009 and 2010 today. Whether we will get to 2011 is really questionable because so far we've gone through 21 decks going 1999 to 2008. I have now like 44 decks to go through for today, just for 2009 and 2010, so quite a lot more. Hello Soul, good to see you. I appreciate everyone who watched the recent Flygon upload. That video took a lot of effort to put together, but I was a big fan of that. Soul says W camera, I appreciate that. Tried to get the camera to be at a better angle this time. So this is the 2009 Toxicroak SP deck. I believe some versions of this are called Hold because it's Honchkrow, Uxie, Luxray, and Dialga. this was originally the World Championship deck list from that year. However, I changed out some cards because the World Championship deck list is just not that great. The Toxicroak strategy in general is very strong at countering specifically Machamp, but it struggles in SP mirrors, and there's some matchups like Flygon where you can't keep a stadium in play, so it's not a great focus. So I put a little bit less focus on the Toxicroak strategy and just added some more SP techs. My favorite, of course, being Ambipom, which is my favorite annoying SP tech. And while it's not very popular in 09 because it doesn't counter Garchomp, Tailcoat is still incredibly strong. Even if a Flygon's milling you, you can just strip away its energy and then build yourself enough time to build up like a Ditto to KO it. So, very good card still. Energy Disruption's always good. Of course, we got the Dialga in here, the Lucario to make all of our attacks do 2x2 weakness. And of course, the heart of any SP deck is the Cyrus. For anyone who hasn't ever played an SP deck before, I know this is 2009, so kind of introducing the SP engine. It's all based around the Cyrus, which just searches out a supporter card, a basic energy, and a Team Galactic's Invention item card. And it's pretty much the entire basis of all the SP decks are around Cyrus and its ability to continually just find you energy attachment for turn. Usually you find a Cyrus conspiracy off of your Cyrus's conspiracy, and then you find the useful Team Galactic's inventions, one of which is Radar, which helps you find your SP Pokemon, one of which is Energy Gain, which makes your attacks cheaper, and there's also Power Spray, which is like a Yu-Gi-Oh card. You get to cancel your opponent's Pokepowers, so you get to stop their abilities from being used. Another one of my techs is Roserade. This has been really helpful. I use both Roserade and Houndoom. Arguably, Houndoom's just a stronger card, but I've found a lot of use for this Roserade. Being able to snipe is pretty strong, but I took out the Rainbow Energy, so I can't do that anymore. But basically just Poison Bind stops your opponent from retreating and poisons them. And in these old formats, Poison would actually, any special conditions rather, would turn off your opponent's access to their abilities. So, Poison Bind, really good. Black Cry, also very good, stopping the opponent from retreating. And if you combine Black Cry with a poison effect, such as the Skuntank in the deck, which poisons the opponent, you can stop them from retreating while poisoning them, which is very good. Anytime you can take a KO with poison as well, you stop your opponent from taking a response KO with their Toxicroak. Here's the Ditto tech. This is a Flygon tech, also good against other cards like Gengar. Very versatile card. And Toxicroak is the main part of the Toxicroak engine, since if the opponent's poisoned, it does 60 damage, so pretty strong attacker that can attack for 1 energy, and its ability, Anticipation Pokebody, makes it immune to effects of attacks, meaning it can't be KO'd by things like Machamp, which would otherwise just KO it. We'll talk about Machamp later. And there's the Fighting Toxicroak, which is just like a one of in almost every SP deck, because it's just a really strong card. So that is my SP box. It's similar to the World Championship list for that year called Crown Tiger. However, I have changed up a few cards, added more text in there. I don't think my list is optimal, but it's just kind of playing the most amount of text I can fit in, because I really enjoy, in my SP box, just having the most amount of options as possible. So, next up, for the second deck, we have LuxApe. This is my favorite deck of the format. I did steal this list from Flood, who is in the chat. LuxApe is a it's very similar to LuxChamp in that it's a very powerful and aggressive SP deck, where SP box is more of like a utility toolbox. This is more of an aggressive and powerful deck, aiming to just launch powerful attacks. And the Luxray is, of course, one of the most powerful cards in 2009. Bright Look brings up one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. It's a boss's orders effect on the ability. And its Flash Impact is just a really efficient attack. And you combine that with another really powerful SP Pokemon, which is Infernape, which does 100 damage. And it also has Intimidating Roar, which is a power that says if it's active, or not, it's not even if it's active, if your Infernape is just in play anywhere, you can force your opponent to switch, which seems kind of weak. It's not like a boss's order effect, you just force them to switch. But if you've played Standard for any amount of time, you've seen cards like Iron Bundle come in, and with the combination of just Gust and forcing your opponent to move around the board, you basically have access to wherever you want, whatever you want to attack, and Infernape is just a really powerful and really, really pretty level X card. You'll notice for my 2009 Gauntlet, one of the things that I did is that I chose to use as many World Championship cards as I had in my collection. So a lot of these are just random World Championship cards. I decided that I wanted to build 2009, but I couldn't afford to put the same budget into 2009 that I did with 2010, so I had to make compromises. Here's a nice Vulpix right here. This is for the Ninetales in the deck, and the shiny Vulpix is just probably the best one to play in this style of deck since it's got a nice free attack. Got the same SP engine. You're going to see this in all the SP decks. Pretty much every single one is going to be playing all 4 of the SP tool cards. And let's see if we can find any other big Pokemon in the deck. There's the regular Infernape. Nice, very beat up reverse holo, but I do like this Infernape quite a lot. So figured I'd get a chance to use my damage reverse holos in this format. Split Bomb's another really good attack, 20-2 Pokemon. If your opponent's deck doesn't play anything that heals damage off their board, you can just stack a bunch of damage with this attack. But also High Jump Kick for 50 is just a really powerful attack again. There's not as much healing in 2009 because Nidoqueen wasn't in every deck, so you can stick some damage on your opponent's board. Probably the most important card in this deck, besides the Infernape and the Luxray in terms of like attacking, is the Ninetales, which has the really cool Pokepower Color Shift, where once during your turn you may choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, and Ninetales becomes the same type as that Pokemon. So what this allows you to do is you can turn into any type on your opponent's board, and then swing with the Fire Blast stack for 60, which will do 120 when applied for the ×2 weakness. And this is a counter to both Mewtwo and Flygon. Flygon is a very popular Pokemon in this format that also has 120 HP before it level X's, so you can win a KO Flygons. And Mewtwo is a card that otherwise completely walls out this deck, but Ninetales does actually 120, and Mewtwo walls out basic Pokemon. Ninetales is not basic. One thing to know about this Ninetales, I was in the local card store last year in August, and someone brought in a collection of, I don't know if it was their collection or if it was somewhere they found it. I think they might have found it at the local thrift store. And the collection had cards that had been pulled out of packs, but just stuffed back into the packs and just left in there. And one of the packs I got to undo was this beautiful Ninetales, so it's a very, very pretty copy. I don't know how close I want to get it to the camera, but this card is as mint as it gets for the cards in my collection. So it's a very, very clean reverse holo. Obviously, over time, they'll get some edge wear on it, but, you know, that just kind of happens in my collection. I'll try not to scratch the surface, though. Gray asks, were they a Pokemon collector? Not anymore. It was really cool, though. I can't show the photos because my phone is the one live streaming right now. But I got to essentially open up old packs because they were just, they'd opened up the packs. They were like, the top was like scissored off, and then they just put the cards back in. And I got to pull a Tyranitar Prime. There was a Kyogre Groudon Legend. No level X's, unfortunately, but minty reverse holos, lots of those. Uxie level X, this is another attacker in all the SP decks that you will see. It's partially good because Uxie is just one of the best cards ever. Uxie's set up when you play it from your hand into your bench, you draw cards until you have 7 in your hand. It's also got an attack that puts it back into the deck, so it's not even a bench liability, you can just get it out of play. And then Uxie levels up from that Uxie, or Uxie level X levels up from the Uxie. It gives it a trade-off, which is the same ability as Dracloak, where you look at the top 2 and you get to keep 1 and put the one to the bottom, the other one to the bottom. So it turns your like one-time draw use liability into a consistent draw engine. And Zen Blade's just a really powerful attack, doing 60 damage, and if you ×2 that by weakness, you're hitting a lot of things for knockout, including your opponent's Uxies. So that is definitely relevant. We'll talk about Azelf later. I can't cover all the cards, we're just looking at one deck. So we'll get back to different cards. Looker's really interesting, card that's in 2009. You look at your opponent's hand, and then you choose you or your opponent, and one player shuffles and draws 5. Not as strong as a card like Judge, but definitely an interesting support option. I've been playing the card a little bit more in 2010, and seeing some use for it over Judge in some cases, but it's definitely one of those cards that's like a 2009 only card in most cases. Next up we have Flychamp. This is my first of 3 Flygon decks I own. I highly recommend if you're curious about more of these decks. I posted a thread on my Twitter about a week ago about my whole 09 collection, And Flychamp is combining Flygon, which is a very bulky attacker that has a lot of disruption in it, with Machamp, a very fast attacker, able to take one-hit KOs with its takeout attack, which just knocks out a basic Pokemon. And Hurricane Punch is also just a really efficient attack, which does 30 times the number of coins you flip heads out of 4. So you can potentially do up to 120. Usually you're going to do 60. Still really good. One of the most important cards in any Diamond and Pearl format is Call Energy, which is in this deck. Call Energy, if it's attached to your active Pokemon, you get to search your deck for 2 basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench, and then it ends your turn. So this is a really good way to set up your board. So a lot of decks choose to take advantage of Call Energy. We have Flygon, that is the star of the deck. Rainbow Float gives free retreat to your Pokemon in play that have the same type as the energy attached to Flygon. So if I attach a grass energy to Flygon, all my grass Pokemon get free retreat. If you saw my Flygon video last week, we already talked a lot about Flygon, so I won't go too in-depth on Flygon, but very, very good card. One of the best families printed in the entire era. The entire family has very strong effects on it. This deck does take advantage of Upper Energy. There's no double colorless in 2009, so you have to take advantage of Upper. Do I have the Beedrill deck from 2009 World Championship? Yes, I do. We'll see that in a bit. This deck also takes advantage of Claydol, which we'll come back to Nidoqueen in a second. Claydol is right here. Don't have any Worlds copies for that. Once during your turn, choose up to 2 cards from your hand and put them on your bottom of your deck, then draw until you have 6 cards in hand. So essentially Beedrill from Brilliant Stars, the standard card, but on steroids, this card is infinitely stronger than Beedrill. I don't know why they made this ability usable multiple times per turn. That was probably an oversight in the design, but it is very strong and it helps evolution decks set up. Also, Nidoqueen, very important card. In between turns, heal 10 damage from each of your Pokemon. Very strong body, even if you can't stack it to use multiple times. Just the damage output in the Diamond and Pearl formats is just not nearly as high as like the EX era formats where you had stuff like LBS doing 200 damage. So Nidoqueen can just completely heal your Pokemon, especially with Flygon giving all of your guys free retreat. You can easily just switch between attackers and heal them up very easily. It's also got good attacks too, so that helps. I choose to play the Fighting Flygon in here just because I like it. And I had a Flychamp that I bought for 2010 that I took apart to build another Flygon deck, and I didn't want this Flygon to go without a home, because this is just one of my favorite cards. Just such a pretty card. Irritating Buzz puts 1 damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon that isn't fighting, and Sandsonic's just a pretty strong attack, doing 80 if you attach a fighting to Flygon. It's definitely not as good as the Rising Rivals Flygon, but it's also not a bad attacker into cards like LuxRay that you saw before, and LuxRay's pretty popular, so it's not like you won't use that card. We'll come back to Azelf at some point. Machamp level X, this is a really cool card. As long as Machamp's your active Pokemon, each of Machamp's attacks do 60 more damage. However, Machamp also takes 60 more damage from attacks. So essentially you just turn Machamp into kind of like a glass cannon with this level X. So you have 150 HP, so even if your opponent does hit you with a reasonably strong attack, there's a chance that your Machamp level X might live. I don't think I've ever used the attack on Machamp level X, actually. I think maybe once. I've never used the attack and actually gotten a benefit from Machamp's attack. But it's just a really good card that levels up from an already very strong card. Moving on, I think I had a really solid start to 2009, because like my first 4 decks, or 2 SP decks, we had a Flygon deck and we had a Gengar deck. So that's a really strong start. We have Mothergar. Mothergar is very iconic. Gengar in general, really, really S-tier card when it first came out in the Stormfront format, which I do have built with proxies. Very, very strong card that just does a lot of damage. Shadow Room snipes 30 damage on one of your opponent's Pokemon, but 60 if they have a Poke Power. So essentially, you can snipe your opponent's draw Pokemon like Claydol for lots of damage, and then finish off the KOs later without using a second attack. Poltergeist is a situationally useful attack that does 30 times the number of trainers in your opponent's hand. If your opponent isn't careful, you can easily take a one-hit KO with that. You know, if they have 3-4 trainers, you're doing a lot of damage. The main thing that makes this card obnoxious is Feigning Spell. If Gengar were to be knocked out by damage from an attack, you flip a coin. If heads, the defending Pokemon's also knocked out. So your opponent kind of has to find a way, whether it be poison or damage counter placement, like an effect of an attack, some way to do like a knockout on Gengar that's not going to proc the feigning spell. But that's difficult because of Nidoqueen, which once again heals your Pokemon. So it's really hard to like poison Gengar to death because Nidoqueen will heal the Gengar before it dies to poison. So that's kind of the combo here. Crobat is for its Flash Bite. It's also in all the SP decks as well. But when you play Crobat down, you put 1 damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Really, really strong. And Poketurn is the other SP tool we haven't talked about yet. It just picks up one of your Pokemon SP and all cards attached. So you can just reuse Crobat's Flash Bite to put as much damage as you want as long as you can keep binding the Poketurns. So if I Shadow Room a Pokemon like Claydol for 60 damage and then I play down Crobat, put 1 more damage, Poketurn, pick it up and do another damage, that's a prize card. So Crobat's very good here. This is a little bit less powerful in this format. Gengar definitely got a little bit downgraded. Things like Nidoqueen are both a benefit and a harm for it, since it can't keep a bunch of damage on the opponent's field. And in the Diamond and Pearl Stormfront format, it's very strong alongside Cresselia, and Cresselia is just not the same power level in this format anymore. This deck does take advantage of Broken Time Space. Hello, James. I missed you a minute ago, I believe. Good to see you. So Broken Time Space is a very strong stadium that each player can evolve a Pokemon that they played that turn. So if I want, I can just go put down a Ghastly, evolve it to Haunter, evolve it to Gengar. No problem. Also relevant in this format is the Old Rare Candy, which can also evolve a Pokemon the turn you play it. So I can put down a Ghastly, Rare Candy, and a Gengar the turn I played it down. So very easy to get evolutions out in this format. Still working on getting some of these cards to be World Championship cards, but that's part of the fun, is finding the missing cards for these decks. So this deck's pretty simple. It's not the strongest deck in the format. It's definitely tier 2 at the highest, because it does struggle a little bit, and there's definitely bad matchups, but it is cool. Good morning to Taro. It's actually afternoon over here in America, but I know Taro is from Japan, so it's great to see you, Taro. Hope everything's going well over there. Just doing a deck collection showcase today. We will start with 2009, which will be about halfway through my 2009 decks, and then we'll get to 2010. So it gets a little faster as I go through these decks once I start to hit all the main staple cards of the format. I don't have to talk about like Nidoqueen in depth every single time I get to it, right? Next up, one of my favorite decks. Even though I have this deck built already for 2010, I had to build Gyarados for 2009. Gyarados is just one of the coolest attackers ever. I just posted a YouTube short, actually, about Gyarados. So for anyone who doesn't know, Gyarados does 30 damage times the number of Magikarp in your discard pile for 0 energy. So your goal is to get 3 Magikarps in the discard pile and then swing for 90 damage for 0 energy. We do that with Sableye. Sableye has the Impersonate attack, finds your supporter cards, and you can find your supporter cards to both find the Magikarp and discard them from your hand. So we have Felicities, which discards up to 2 cards from your hand, and then you draw either 3 or 4 cards. That's how you get the Magikarp in the discard pile. And there's also Roseanne in the deck, which finds basic Pokemon, so you can get your Magikarp out of the deck. This deck also just has a bunch of basic techs. I won't be going over each and every one of them, but they all serve different purposes. It's playing, once again, the Crobat in here. And this deck's really interesting because you don't have any energy to use your Tail Revenge attack. You just play cards like Warp Energy, which are just special energy that provide a benefit. So you don't have to play energy, but it's still worth playing some like Warp Energy. Once again, we're taking advantage of Broken Time Space. As I explained in my YouTube short, Gyarados loves Broken Time Space because it lets you both put a Gyarados down immediately, meaning you can have 3 Magikarp in the discard pile and not care. And you can also use Super Scoop Up, which is a card that picks up your Gyarados on a coin flip. So if you, let's just say I take an attack for 80 damage, I can pick up my Gyarados and put it back down immediately, and then just switch Gyarados back up into the active and start attacking. Here's my one Japanese card, I believe, in the entire 09 Gauntlet. Taro says, no collectors. This is a 2009 deck. Correct. This is a 2009 version of Gyarados. You'll notice, Taro, for my 2009 decks, they're using a lot of these silver-bordered World Championship cards, where all my 2010 decks use the standard yellow border cards. This deck also plays Luxray. Luxray's Bright Look, once again, to remind, allows you to Boss's Order your opponent. Essentially, you play it down onto your Luxray to level it up, and then you get to use Bright Look for a boss's orders effect. Hello, PokeFan346. Good to see you. Good to see you. And there's the basic Luxray. I like him. I also play Time Space Distortion. This is a way to get back your Pokemon. This deck, you either have to play Time Space Distortion or Rescue. I'm playing a combination of both. I'm still not a huge fan of Time Space Distortion because I flipped too many tails on it. Essentially, flip 3 coins for each heads. You get a Pokemon from the discard pile to your hand. I'm a bigger fan of the Rescue, which just lets you get a Pokemon back. This deck also plays Plus Power as a way to boost your damage. Crobat boosts your damage, and you have Plus Power to boost your damage. Gyarados is all about just stacking damage. Probably the most important card in the deck is Azelf. Azelf is a one-of in almost every single Diamond and Pearl deck. And the reason for that is Time Walk. When you play Azelf from your hand onto your bench, you can look at all of your face-down prize cards, and you get to take a Pokemon you find there, and then swap another card from your hand for the Pokemon. So it's essentially Hisui and Heavy Ball, but just infinitely stronger. Obviously, it does take a bench spot, unlike Hisui and Heavy Ball, but Gyarados needs all 4 Magikarps to do its maximum damage with Tail Revenge. So, uh-oh, we lost our phone. I lost my signal. One sec. Looks like I lost my signal. One sec. Let me get my webcam back up. Is everyone else losing the signal as well? I don't know why, but I can't get the signal right now. Uh-oh. Looks like we're missing the signal, so I don't have my camera right now. Let me restart my phone real quick, and I will get it back up in a minute. It's having some issues right now. And not sure why I lost the signal there. Let's restart the phone. If I can, we're just going to take it down off the camera holder real quick. Restart. Appreciate everyone showing up. It'll be just a couple minutes. I don't know why, but my phone just went out. So let's restart my phone, and we'll get the camera back in a minute. In the meantime, you can't see Azelf, but you saw him a minute ago. Essentially, you can unprize any Pokemon, it goes to your hand, and then you also get to put your prize cards back however you like, so it's a good way to map your prize cards out for the rest of the game. And that's mostly the Gyarados deck. I'll put the Gyarados deck away, so when you get back, there'll be a new deck. Just gotta figure out why my camera is broken. And we'll get the camera set up again, hopefully. So let me just open up my Irian webcam real quick. And should be able to just reconnect it once my phone starts up again. It's being very slow. And we will... Oh boy, you don't have to optimize my apps. Sorry for the delay. Taro asks, is it a World Championship deck card? Yes. The cards I use with the silver borders are World Championship deck cards. I do have 1 or 2 Japanese cards here or there in the decks as well. But mostly just World Championship deck cards, because World Championship deck cards, you can get them very cheap individually. It's a good way to build decks on a budget. So for this format, I did not have the full budget that 2010 got, so I had to, for 2009, build with like a lower budget. So let me just get the camera back up. I don't know what happened with that. And hopefully no more issues. Okay, looks like we're getting camera feed again. Excellent. So, I'm not sure why there was an issue there, if it just shut down on my computer, or if it had some kind of issue on the phone, but what's important is that the camera is back, so I'll just take a second to just reconfigure the setup, and we should be good to go. So, does everyone see the camera again? Just give me a go ahead and chat. Poke Trainer Hub asks, saw your 2009 thread. Did you end up posting, or sorry, your 2010 thread? Did you end up posting a 2009 thread? Yes. So 2009 I only have 9 decks for. I mean, only 9 decks, right? But I did post a thread, and when I try to post threads about formats that are kind of different ones that not everyone plays, I usually try to, I usually try to like, give some kind of context, like why do I play this format? 2009 is an interesting format, and I am still always going to be on the side of 2010, but 2009 still has some appeal to it. I think it's got some interesting decks, such as this Beedrill deck we're going to talk about that only exist in the context of this format. You can play Beedrill in 2010, it's just not as good as Jumpluff, for instance. So there's lots of decks in 2009, like Flygon's Dominance, right, that make it an interesting format with its own unique qualities, right? So that's why I think 2009 is worth building, in short. But I definitely recommend going and reading my thread on 2009. Taro says, World Championship decks are cool. My favorite is signed. Oh boy, those are too small. I'm not good at reading to begin with, and then I can't read those because they're too small. I apologize, my monitor is so far away. I'm assuming those are probably the 2010, maybe ones. I don't know. Okay, I'll have to look at the signatures to see if I could just pick it out. But it's very hard to read the symbols from the distance I am from my monitor, so I apologize, Taro. Next, we are talking about the Beedrill deck. This is the deck that won the World Championships. I chose to build the iconic LuxDrill version rather than like a totally speed deck version. The LuxDrill version is unique because it plays Luxray in the deck, which sounds like nowadays like it's like, oh duh, you play Luxray, right? But the Luxray Crobat engine wasn't as common back in the day, and the Luxray, crucially in this deck, is actually an attacker for the deck. You can actually attack with it, and it answers one of the deck's worst matchups, which is Palkia. So this deck plays both Beedrills. Beedrill with Flutter Wings searches the deck for a grass Pokemon and puts it into your hand. And Beedrill with Band Attack does 30 times the number of Beedrill you have in play. So you just want to get these guys in play as soon as possible to search out all your grass Pokemon, and then the other Beedrill just attacks for the number of Beedrills you have in play. So it's like a swarm deck. This deck's super weak to Palkia Lock, though, because Palkia limits you to only having 3 benched Pokemon. But this deck also plays Luxray, which Flash Impact does 60 damage, and you're able to then KO your opponent's Palkia with the Luxray, so you don't have to attack with Beedrill. So it gives you a counter to Palkia, which otherwise the deck just has a very bad Palkia matchup. This deck also uses Broken Time Space, really good stadium card. And again, it plays Lightning Energy and Multi-Energy. This deck is very unique, even among the decks that use the Luxray Crobat engine. It's very much all in on that engine, so you can actually attack with the Luxray. Of course, we play Crobat for more damage. And this deck also plays Cyrus, which is very unique. Most Crobat Luxray decks that aren't like just SP decks don't usually play Cyrus. So it's all in on this engine. Also plays 3 Claydol, so very, very reliant on Claydol getting on the board early. And in this format, there's way more basic search with cards like Roseanne than there is cards like BB. Roseanne grabs 2 basics, whereas BB only grabs 1 evolution. So if you can just have your Claydol earlier, that's why the deck plays 3. Just makes it a lot easier to find Claydol. And Cynthia's Feelings, another great card in this deck. If your Beedrill gets knocked out, you want to get it back into play. Cynthia's Feelings shuffles your hand to your deck and draws 4, but if you got knocked out, it draws 8 instead. So very powerful comeback card. And Multi-Energy counts as any type as long as there's only one special energy being Multi-Energy attached to your Pokemon. So it's essentially the same as the Luminous Energy, which we have in Standard now. Other than that, Beedrill deck is very, it does its Beedrill things. You hit kind of hard with Beedrill and try to just swarm the board with bees to overrun the opponent. But it is definitely, it's not the strongest deck in retrospect, but it is definitely a cool and iconic deck. I feel like any deck or any gauntlet for 2009 should have Beedrill because it's just a very iconic deck from that time. And let's see. Next up is Stallgon. So, Stallgon is a really interesting deck from the 2009 format. I don't know the full history on 2009 in total, but this, from what I understand, this deck was kind of like a secret deck going into the World Championships. The meta was evolving very fast around the time. US Nats, Flygon did not perform as well as people thought, but by Worlds, people had figured out, okay, Flygon with Nidoqueen is pretty good. Very, very bulky deck. And this one takes advantage of Palkia level X, which is a very powerful card to use Restructure, which once during your turn, you may have your opponent switch one of your active Pokemon with one of your benched Pokemon, and then you get to do the same to them. So essentially, they get to boss you, you get to boss them. But if you remember Flygon from the other decks, Flygon gives free retreat to your Pokemon, so it doesn't matter what they bring up. You get to bring up their Pokemon, though, and you're trying to trap them. So the goal is, of course, this is like a more of a trap deck. We use Memory Berry, which lets us copy the effects of our Stage 1 and Basic evolutions, copy the attacks, and the goal is to use our attacks on our Basic and Stage 1 evolutions to set up for Flygon level X, which has Wind Erosion, which in between turns, if Flygon's active, you discard the top card of your opponent's deck. So the goal is to just deck your opponent out with this. We do that by copying Trapinch, if I could find him. Trapinch has the Inviting Trap, which switches one of the opponent's bench Pokemon into the active, and it also has Sand Tomb, which makes it so that Pokemon can't retreat. So if you make it so they can't retreat, you do like 10 damage, and then you mill the top card of their deck. Eventually, they're going to deck out, is the goal. There's also Mewtwo level X in here, which is a Pokemon that prevents all effects of attacks, including damage, done to Mewtwo by your opponent's Pokemon that are not evolved. So SP decks have to have some way of answering Mewtwo. Otherwise, it just completely walls out most of their deck. Anything else notable about this deck? This deck is much more simple compared to the other Flygon variants. It's not the strongest in retrospect. I feel like it's less powerful once you know what the strategy is, but it's very cool. Hello, Zacharoni, good to see you. And Logan says, I enjoyed the video, man. Flygon, very informative. Yes, that's one of my favorite videos I've made in a long time, so I'm glad that it seems to have resonated with some people, even if the YouTube algorithm didn't love it. Nidoqueen here, again, really good healing card, but also just a really strong attacker. Both Mewtwo and Nidoqueen just make incredible attackers with the Psychic Energy in the deck in the late game. So if you can power up your Nidoqueen, if things get hairy, Nidoqueen can get in there and throw an attack, but it's mainly just to heal your board. But Nidoqueen's a very good attacker. Much more so, that's one thing you see in 2009, I guess, a lot more. Even though 2010 has double colorless energy, you don't see Nidoqueen attack as much as in 2009 from my experience. Let's see. Next up we have the Beedrill, or not Beedrill, Palkia, the counter to Beedrill, that's what I meant to say. So this is specifically Plucks. So Palkia Lock was a popular deck in 2009, kind of fell off at US Nats, but people by Worlds brought it back, and it's just a really strong deck that's based around locking your opponent. So Palkia has Lost Cyclone. There's a power that says, once during your turn, you may force each player to Lost Zone their benched Pokemon until each player only has 3 remaining. So what this does for your opponent, it's really disruptive. They have to get rid of their, maybe their draw Pokemon. Against Beedrill, they have to have 4 Beedrills in play. That's all of their bench spots, right? So they have to get rid of something else if they want to keep their bees. And it's losing them, not discarding them, so they're gone forever. It's also got a really powerful attack. Hydro Shot discards 2 energy and does 80 snipe. We combine this with Luxray, because otherwise Palkia has a really hard time dealing with the mirror match sometimes, and also with opponents' Luxrays. So Luxray gives you a faster attacker, it gives you the ability to Gust, it gives you the ability to hit Lightning weakness against Gyarados. So pairing Luxray with Palkia, very good combo. The main reason that Palkia is very good is because of Mesprit. So if you've ever seen the Regigigas deck from 2010, it's a similar strategy here. Lost Cyclone cleans up our bench space to allow us to play down more Mesprit, and Mesprit says when you play it from your hand into your bench, your opponent can't use Poke Powers during their next turn. So our goal is to play down Mesprit, and then get rid of it with Lost Cyclone once it has done its job. Taro asks, I heard the combination of Dialga and Warp Energy had not been popular in 2009. So it's not entirely true, but Dialga plays differently in 2009 than it does in 2010. Dialga in 2009 is a good card to have in an SP deck because it answers Mewtwo level X and it allows you to turn off Nidoqueen. But Dialga, unlike 2010, does not have Expert Belt or Garchomp C level X, so you can't revolve around using Dialga and Warp Energy to continually heal your Dialga over and over again. So it's a little bit less of a tank card and more of just, it's a really good card that answers a lot of matchups. There was a deck called DPL, Dialga, Palkia, Luxray, that was popular going into the World Championships that paired Dialga with Palkia and Luxray, because that gave you a way to answer Mewtwo, and just turning off your opponent's Pokebodies is really strong. So you might play Warp Energy in that deck to get your level X's into play more efficiently, because these guys have a pretty hefty retreat cost. Palkia is also a really good attacker on its own. Pearl Breath does 50 damage and spreads 10 to your opponent's bench Pokemon. So just a really efficient attack with energy gain, reducing it down to only taking 2 energy attachments. And spread damage, if your opponent can't get their Nidoqueen online when you're locking them down, it's kind of hard. You just make it really difficult to deal with the repeated spread damage. Toxicroak, again, a really good revenge attacker against Luxray. It's in every SP deck pretty much. And this deck also uses Power Spray, which is even bigger because not only do we have Mesprit to turn off your opponent's Poke Powers, but also Power Spray turns off the Poke Powers. Taro says, thank you for teaching. Well, I appreciate you for being a good audience. Not everyone wants to hear me rant about old cards, so I'm always appreciative when there are people who enjoy learning about the game. But Dialga is still good in 2009. It's a very strong card. Very, very strong. Again, we have Uxie. We've already talked about most of the cards in the SP kind of engine, but Palkia Lock's just unique because it's a deck that just turns off your opponent's Poke Powers. You try to just never let them use their powers in the early game so that they can't set up their board with like clay dolls. And then you can kind of just overwhelm them with your attacks. I also choose to play Mismagius in my list. This is a Mewtwo level X counter. Mewtwo level X is much more popular in 2009 than it is 2010, so it's very much worth taking into account. And Mismagius has the Crash Chant, which choose up to 4 in any combination of tool cards or technical machine cards in play, and then you discard them, and then it does 20 times the amount of cards you discard. So you can discard your opponent's tools and be really disruptive in the SP mirror, or if you're playing against a Mewtwo level X, you can discard your own tool cards. If you discard 3 tool cards, you will one-shot the Mewtwo for free. It's also got a decent second attack. If your opponent has 4 or more bench Pokemon, you choose one of them and return that Pokemon and all cards attached to it to their hand. So you can, if they get like an early rare candy down, but they fill up their bench, you can, instead of Lost Cycloning, you can choose to use Horror Chant and force them to put back like a rare candy Pokemon to hand or something like that to be disruptive. So, which Misdreavus do you play? It's just a Misdreavus with like a free sleep attack. I don't think it's really that big of a deal which Misdreavus you play. You can play whichever one you want as long as it has a decent free attack. But I just chose to play the one that puts your opponent to sleep for free, since you can maybe steal a turn off that. Lastly, I have my third Flygon deck for this format. This is the last 2009 deck. We have Saigon. So Saigon is a really powerful deck that won the World's Grinders. So essentially, back in the day, there was an event called the Grinders Before Worlds, where players who had not qualified for Worlds would compete in a tournament, and I believe it was the top 4 got in from the Grinders. If you got the top 4 slots, I believe you would get in. I could be wrong on that. It might only be the winner. It might be top 2. I believe it was top 4, though. If anyone knows, correct me on that. And this deck is just using Flygon and using all of the powerful psychic attacks in the format. One of them being Dusknoir, of course, which Dark Palm forces your opponent, if they have 4 more bench Pokemon, you get to choose one of them and shuffle it into the deck. Just one of the strongest effects ever printed on a card. So if your opponent puts down multiple bench Pokemon, they're not playing around Dusknoir. Because you don't have to reveal that you're playing the Psychic Flygon. They might think, oh, it's Flygon Machamp. You know, they have a Psychic Energy for the Nidoqueen. But in fact, you play cards like Dusknoir as a surprise. And having this deck built, the reason I chose to build it is so I can play Flygon mirrors. I wanted to play offensive Flygon decks like Flygon Machamp versus another Flygon deck so that I can actually have fun playing Flygon mirrors, which are honestly the most 2009 thing imaginable. We do have some Japanese cards in this deck. So this is a Call Energy from Japan. I got this off of my friend Nolo, who had these in his collection, and he sold them to me. So I just kind of use these in whatever format I don't have the English copies of Call Energy extra for, so that works there. Again, the Flygon family, incredibly powerful cards, even the pre-evolutions. This Trapinch, if it's in the active spot, you can accelerate a fighting energy from your discard pile to it. So you get energy acceleration, which is pretty strong. The other Trapinch, of course, is in here as well for trapping shenanigans. And then the Vibrava says that you do 20 times the number of energy cards in your opponent's discard pile, and then you shuffle those energy into their deck. And while this seems like it's bad, you know, Flygon likes to deck out your opponent, get rid of their resources. You can take a sneaky knockout for 1 energy by copying the Energy Typhoon attack against like an opposing Flygon deck. If they're down, like, let's just say like 3 energy. No, you need to be down, what, 5 energy, I guess? Yeah, with weakness, 5 energy. Or 4 energy if they're leveled up into level X. So, sneakily good attack that can take some one-hit KOs. Again, we're playing Psychic Text, so this deck has Nidoqueen to heal your board and as another good attacker. And there's also one more Psychic Tech. You've seen him many times. There's the Mewtwo to level up into Mewtwo level X. We'll get to Mewtwo level X eventually. I do not play the correct Duskull in this deck. You should be playing the shiny Duskull if you really want to have this deck be perfect, but I just don't own any extra copies right now, so chose to just play the regular one. There we are. Mewtwo level X. You guys have seen him plenty of times now, but he's immune to effects of attacks, including damage from basic Pokemon, so SP decks have a really hard time dealing with Mewtwo, and he's also just a really powerful attacker, doing 120 damage. For 3 energy, so you can power him up pretty easily with the other Mewtwo, which has a free attack that accelerates energy from the discard pile to itself, so you can use Giga Burn to do 120, discard all the energy, and then use the free energy absorption to get energy back. I know I played against Taro some time ago with a Mewtwo level X, and I was able to win the game by re-accelerating energy, and then using the Recover attack to heal my Mewtwo to stall out a game. So Mewtwo's got a lot of good attacks. Other than that, it's just got 3 different Psychic lines, and it's just playing a very consistent Flygon line as well. Very, very strong Flygon Claydol combo. You've seen most of these cards before. It is my 3rd Flygon deck for this format. But again, this is the format where Flygon rules, so I really wanted to, for my 2009 Gauntlet, just kind of let Flygon do its thing, right? Because it's this one format that it gets before it starts being countered by cards like Garchomp C-Level X that hit for weakness. So I kind of just wanted to let Flygon do its thing to its fullest extent in my Gauntlet. Even if it's not the most balanced Gauntlet on Earth, I do think it's a pretty decent Gauntlet, though. Other than the fact that, like, Luxdra kind of struggles into most things, but that's just what it is. Next up, we're moving on to the Big Boy format, which is the format I have the most decks for, which is 2010 Worlds. So anyone who follows me probably knows me for 2010 Worlds more than any other format, because I don't shut up about it. I have 35 decks for this format, and I have been building this format for a long time. It's one of my first retro formats I got into, and it's also just my favorite, because I feel like 2010 Worlds gives you just an incredible amount of options. There's so many games you get to play. One of my flaws with 2009 is that sometimes there's more shutout games because of the lack of Spiritomb in the format to elongate games. So you get these really long, grindy games, and you also just get to play more games when there isn't any shutouts. So I feel like 2010 Worlds is still going to be my favorite, probably forever. I don't think I'll ever find a retro format that I enjoy more. But once again, we're looking at a Gyarados deck, very similar to the 2009 Gyarados deck. This is the one I showed off in my short earlier today. And this deck uses Float Soul, though, which is an interesting tech that says if any of your water Pokemon are knocked out by damage from your opponent's attack, you may put that Pokemon and all cards attached to it into your hand instead of the discard pile. So if you play against a deck like Dialga or a deck like Gardevoir and they knock you out, Typically you'd be in a lot of trouble because they lock down your Poke Powers or lock down your item cards. But Floatzel says that instead of getting locked down, the Gyarados just goes back to your hand. So you don't have to worry about having to recover the Gyarados. It just goes back to your hand. It means you can't get bricked as easily by your opponent, like judging you and taking a knockout. Floatzel, very, very good card. Because it is a Pokemon SP, Dialga level X does not turn it off. Dialga G level X has the Poke Body that turns off other Poke Bodies. But it does not turn off Floatzel since he is an SP. Tarwes, what is my most favorite 2010 deck? We'll get to that eventually. But chances are, if you know me, you know it is to some extent. Because I just like my silly little Gengars. We have Uxie again, so Uxie level X is a draw engine. This deck plays lots of Uxie, and of course Uxie also has the good Zen Blade attack, which you can use in this deck because you play Colorless Energy. In 2010, you go from having Felicity and Roseanne's to having Felicity and Collector. Collector just finds 3 basic Pokemon from the deck. Definitely an upgrade to your Pokemon search. So, very, very strong way to get all your Magikarps out and discard them immediately. We also get Expert Belt, which makes our attacks do 20 more damage, and we have 20 more HP. So Gyarados has 150 HP and swings for 110 damage. And then you can, once again, use Super Scoop Up, which I talked about before, to pick up your Gyarados and just fully heal it. An interesting thing I'm doing in this deck now is I play less Pokemon Rescue than I used to. I only play 3 Rescue. I am not a Time Space Distortion fan in this deck, so I play Rescue. But I chose to play a bunch of other techs like Floatzel to help me out with my recovery. So we play Suicune and Combee. I believe we might have passed Combee. Maybe not. No, we didn't hit Combee yet. We'll hit them eventually. Pokeblowers in this deck. Instead of playing Luxray to gust your opponent, this deck plays Pokeblower, which if you play 2 Pokeblowers at a time, you get to gust one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with a Boss's Orders effect. And then it's got an effect on that also says you may flip, if you play one of them at a time, you get to flip a coin, and if heads, put 1 damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Seems like a really weak effect since it's a coin flip for 10 damage, but if your win con is I'm going to need to take a knockout now, you can get some extra damage with Pokeblower. Of course, you got Plus Power, which just adds 10 damage to your attacks. That's a very good thing. And this deck utilizes the AMU engine. We saw this a couple of times, I believe, in my 2009 decks, but I didn't talk about it. So Azelf has the Downer Material Body, which says if you have Uxie and Mesprit in play, so all 3 of the Lake Guardians, the attacks of your opponent's basic Pokemon cost colorless more. So really good, annoying card against SP decks, which are mostly all basic. Then we have Mesprit again, the one that turns off your opponent's powers. And there's Combee. Combee is really cool. It says when you play Combee down to your bench, you can get a basic Pokemon from your discard pile and put it onto your bench as well. So Combee is a way of recovering your basic Pokemon, mainly Magikarp, but not only Magikarp. You can also get Azelf back or something like that. And it's a way of doing it that is not turned off by any Pokepower lock or turned off by any item lock because it's this weird little honey held item that is built into the card. So it can't be turned off by anything. Once again, Azelf, really important card. And let's see if we can find the Suicune. There it is. Suicune's another tech I'm playing. This is a James G tech that I chose to steal for my list. I originally cut the Suicune for the Combee. However, having Combee and Suicune is really good because you can search them out of the deck. And Suicune says when you play it from your hand to your bench, you can search your discard pile for up to 3 water Pokemon and put them into your hand. So it's really good at just getting back like a whole Gyarados line. Like if you're down like multiple Gyarados and all 4 of your Magikarp, you can get back 1 Magikarp and 2 Gyarados. And it's pretty, very, pretty strong effect. And it's also searchable. So everything, I only play 3 Pokemon Rescue because I'd rather use Pokemon Collector to find a card like Suicune or Combee to search the deck for those. So those cards, very, very good. So that is Gyarados for 2010. Very, very powerful deck. I'd say stronger in 2010 than 2009, but that's maybe subjective. I think Gyarados is a top 5 deck easily in 2010. Anytime people disrespect Gyarados, they get absolutely destroyed by its just insane power and aggression, and it can make comebacks like no other deck can. That deck is capable of anything. Next up, we have Cursegar. This used to be my favorite deck for 2010, so to partially answer your question, Taro, this used to be my favorite deck. Cursegar used to be. I do play Cursegar to a lot of events if I'm going to play because it's just a very safe deck. It's a very strong deck that I know how to play. We'll talk about Gengar Level X in a bit. The main card of this deck is actually the Spirit Tomb, which has a Keystone Seal Pokebody that says when it's in the active, either player can't play item cards from their hand. It says trainer, it means item cards, because that's what they were called back then. Poketrainer Hub asks Cybergon after this one. Cybergon is the 35th deck, so it'll be a while before we get there. You can always check the VOD later if you don't have the time to stay for now for that. So Spirit Tomb locks down item cards, really slows down aggressive decks, especially like Jumpluff and like SP decks. And then it has the free Darkness Race attack, which evolves one of your Pokemon, and you put a damage counter on it. So really, really strong card there. This deck is one of my most beautiful decks because it has these Emerald Energies in there, which is really, really... they're really expensive nowadays, but I got them for much cheaper when I bought the deck, so that's why it has all of these. We also have Nidoqueen. Once again, heals your Pokemon in between turns. Very strong effect. You're going to see a lot of repeat cards because this format was one of the only formats where there is no rotation. So after 2009 Worlds, they didn't rotate any cards that next year. Ghastly is also really important in this deck. Pitch Dark is a free attack that just locks your opponent's item cards. So it's very much like Badoo nowadays. So you get a free attack that locks your opponent's item cards, and it's on an evolving basic with other good Pokemon it evolves into. So you either try to lock down your opponent with Spirit Tomb or with Ghastly, just slow them down in the early game. This card makes really good use of the best shovel draw in 2010 being Judge. So Judge says each player shuffles his or her hand into his or her deck and draws 4 cards. So you get to draw 4 cards and your opponent gets disrupted to 4 cards. So usually if your opponent has a big hand, especially SP decks and Gyarados, they like having big hand sizes. You can hit them with this Judge, put them down to a low hand size. Also Duskull. Reaper Cloth is another one of these built-in held items. This one says that Duskull can evolve the turn you play it, so you can just evolve it into Dusclops immediately, which is pretty cool. And let's see if there's any other cards here. Oh, there is my nice Japanese Goods Rare Candy, I believe from the Reviving Legends set from Japan. These are very expensive over here, but I was lucky enough to get 5 of them for relatively cheap. Like a year ago or so, probably. We're also taking advantage of Dark Palm Dusknoir, which can shuffle one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to the deck, and it's also got the really strong Hard Feelings attack, which does 5 damage. 50 damage, rather. Put 5 damage counters on your opponent's active Pokemon, but for each prize card they take, that increases by 10 damage. So if they take 5 prize cards, you put 100 damage on them, which is just a really powerful attack to use in the late game, and really strong against Pokemon with a Psychic Resistance, because it goes through the effects of Resistance. We have one Gengar, which we'll get back to in a bit. I just got to find the other Gengar first. There we are. Those are the 2 most important cards to talk about here. So, the namesake of the Cursegar deck is Curse Gengar, which has the Curse Pokepower, and says once during your turn, you may move 1 damage counter from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another one of your opponent's Pokemon. So this is a way to move damage on your opponent's board. Really strong effect, but kind of limited. You don't get to move damage off your own board, so you have to set up damage. Thankfully, the attack Shadow Skip does that. Does 60 damage and then 10 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So you do 60 active, 10 to the bench, and then you can also switch Gengar with one of your bench. So the goal of this deck is to hit with Gengar, use Expert Belt, swing for 80 damage, and then you switch into the Spirit Tomb, which, when it's in the active spot, locks your opponent out of item cards. So you just want to hit and run with that. That is the main strategy against decks like Gardevoir, against decks like SP, because they rely on their trainer cards, and also Gardevoir, weak to Psychic, so hitting them for a one-hit KO if they have their weakness online. This deck also has a backup attacker, Gengar Stormfront. It is a backup attacker, yet you play more copies of this than the other guy, because this guy does not get... The hit-and-run guy doesn't get knocked out very often, because he's hiding on the bench. Stormfront Gengar is there to get in the front lines. Remember, it puts 6 damage counters for 1 energy on a Pokemon with the Pokepower, and it has just some really annoying things like Feigning Spell, which if your opponent hits into you and knocks you out, you get to, of course, flip a coin, and if heads, they also get knocked out. So it's another hit-and-run target. If you're playing against the deck like Steelix Prime or something that you can't KO with damage from your attacks, you can try to hit them and then run and force them to hit into your feigning spells. So that's a way to also play the deck. Taro says, Curse Guard is cool but difficult to play. I highly recommend watching the video from Team USA versus Team Japan where I played Curse Guard. It's kind of like a perfect kind of like summary, like explanation, that video of kind of how the deck plays in the SP matchup at least. So it's a really good guide, I think. It kind of shows you exactly what your game plan is in that matchup of the hit and run strategy. So that might help a little bit. If you have any questions, you can also just DM me over Discord because I do play this deck, or did used to play this deck a lot. We also have Gengar level X, huge 30 HP buff. So you put this on top of a Gengar plus 30 HP. And then it's got the absolutely absurd level down Pokepower, which says once during your turn, you can choose one of your opponent's Pokemon level X's, and then you shuffle the level X card off of that Pokemon into the deck. So essentially, it's almost like a devolution, but only you just take their level X back and put it into the deck. So this partially lowers your opponent's HP, and then partially you're just being annoying. You're getting rid of their level X card, limiting their options. But very importantly, against the SP decks, Gengar hits 80 damage. And let's just take a card like LuxRay, for example. LuxRay is 110 on level X, but if I level it down into its base form, it only has 80 HP, so I now take a one-hit KO with my attack. So the goal of this deck is to set up that hit and run, swing for 80, and then if you can level down your opponent, you're starting to take one-hit KOs. But even if you're not taking one-hit KOs, you can clean up damage later with Shadow Room or with the Compound Pain attack, which does 30 each of your opponent's Pokemon that already has damage on it. So Gengar is just an incredibly strong, toxic even deck. Just a very, very strong deck in this format. Definitely like top 3 decks. I think we've covered all the main cards. Of course, we're still playing Claydol. That Cosmic Power Draw Engine is very strong. And this deck is also playing these very nice Haunters, which with Free Retreat. So I like those quite a bit. And I believe we covered all the important cards that are like part of the key strategy. But yeah, it's definitely the majority of the deck. People don't always realize this because you actually play more Stormfront, like the sniping Gengar. You play more of those than you play the Curse Guard. But the reason the deck calls Curse Guard is because it's a hit and run deck first and foremost. Hit and run into the Spirit Tomb, try to lock your opponent out. And if you spam Judge while doing that, usually I try to play Judge for my first knockout of the game because it's really strong to pair knockouts with Judge and Trainer Lock. So try that out if you ever play the deck, Taro. Try to use your Judges at times where it's going to be the most annoying. I forget the term I use for it, but a way to call it is like you want to stack your opponent with like annoying things at once, right? Like a way you used to do it like a year ago in the standard format, you'd play something like Roxanne and then play Path to the Peak. So you get rid of your opponent's hand and lock them down. And it's the same thing with Curse Guard. You kind of want to do annoying effects like knock them out while also locking them down, while also limiting their hand. So try to combo effects all at once, and it makes it a lot harder for the opponent to make a response. Next up we have Flyterra. This is the deck I covered in the Flygon video, so I won't get into it too much, considering I did an entire video based on Flyterra, but essentially Flygon is that guy who can deck your opponent out, and Torterra enables this with Forest Murmurs, which if you're behind, you get a counter catcher effect as your ability for turn. And Torterra is also a really bulky Pokemon that can act as a wall. Where is my Torterras? Please, Torterra. There we are. Torterra has Giga Drain, which heals from it the damage you did to your opponent. So if you do 40 damage, you heal 40 damage. But if I throw an Expert Belt, I now do 60 damage and heal 60 damage. So it's just really hard to knock the Torterra out. And you can run your opponent out of resources and attackers just by overwhelming that. Well, overwhelming them with just repeated attacks while you take almost no damage. Lucas says, I ordered 4 World Championship decks and slowly started teaching my brother the basics of the format. Yeah, the World Championship decks are pretty good this year. I have like 1 or 2 problems with like the Gyarados list, just not playing a Regice in the deck. But other than that, like these lists are pretty strong. And there are 4 really iconic decks from this year. So they did a really good job picking them for this year. We also have, of course, Flygon is in the deck. Let's see if we can find Flygon. It is Flyterra after all, so Flygon plays a pivotal role here as an attacker. Flygon gives you free retreat. He attacks with Power Swing, so you can one-hit KO Garchomps with this Power Swing when you hit for weakness. Also just a really strong card in general. Flygon is a lot weaker in 2010 because it's a lot more things are going around hitting it for weakness, aka Garchomp, but it's also still a really strong card, and Flyterra is just the best way to play Flygon if you want to like win a tournament with Flygon. I do, once again, a very fancy energy in here. Shout out to days when you can get these for relatively cheap. Can't do that anymore. And other than that, the other attacker of this deck is definitely this Torterra right here. Let me just clean that sleeve a little because that's hard to read. It has the Crash Impact attack, which does 60 damage, and then it takes 20 damage in recoil, and you force your opponent to switch. The reason this is good is because against Luxray, you can hit for 120 damage with weakness. And it only takes 1 energy, because a new card that released in this format is kind of a big deal, is double colorless energy, which is just 2 colorless energy, no drawback at all. So very, very strong card. You can pay for Torterra's attacks with that, you can pay for Flygon with that, and you can also even attack with Nidoqueen, which is right here. Nidoqueen does 50 plus 10 for each of your each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So even though it heals, you can also just do a lot of damage. Zacharoni asks, not cheap anymore because of collectors or retro formats are more popular, or both? I think it's a little bit of both, because you definitely see like people like me, I have a lot of cool energies in my collection that I use for my old decks, but also I think a huge part of it is the collectors in this case, because back in the day, I say back in the day like I'm really old, but in like 2017, 18, 19, you could just go to any card store and just find these cool energies in the case, and they just had them laying around for like, you know, $5 or something like that. So that's how I got a lot of my energy before I bought these decks. To be fair, I did buy these decks, and some of them were like pre-blinged with energy. But back in the day, I did used to get a lot of my energy that I have at local card stores. They would just have them out, and you don't see that anymore because I think the collectors also find them cool, so they just pick those up for their collection. So you're not going to see them as much anymore. Next up, we have Kingdra Prime. This is Kingdra Machamp. Kingdra is a really fast and powerful attacker that just tries to get as many Kingdras on the board as soon as possible, kind of like Beedrill, but you don't hit for as many damage as you have Kingdras in play. Instead, Kingdra has Spray Splash, where once during your turn you can put 10 damage on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So if you have 4 Kingdras in play, you can start sniping a bunch of damage. Starts to add up really quickly. And Dragon Steam does 60 for 1 energy, but if your opponent has any fire Pokemon in play, your base damage gets lowered to 20 instead of 60. So a really big downside on that attack. Try to avoid fire types. We play lots of rare candy to let us evolve quickly. And this deck also plays Machamp, which has, once again, that takeout attack that just KOs any non-evolved Pokemon for 1 energy. And this is because Kingdra is really weak to Luxray GL level X, because it has that lightning weakness. It has a really hard time dealing with SP because of that. But Machamp helps make the SP matchup more doable. We also play multi-energy in this deck. Once again, counts as any type of energy as long as you only have 1 special energy attached to the Pokemon it's attached to. So, really good card. And this deck's energy bling of choice is the Heart Gold Soul Silver energies. So, those ones are also really nice. Especially these Lugia ones right here. Those are very, very nice energy cards. So, I'm a big fan that I got to bling this deck out. We do have the shiny Duskull here, because we do play Dusknoir. And we'll get to Dusknoir in a minute. Also Claydol, of course. This deck is a deck that wants to attack as soon as possible, so we do play Claydol to set up our board really fast. And it's got a lot of item cards, just kind of help you get your Pokemon out faster. Of course, we have Expert Belt to boost our damage by 20. So Kingdra can swing for 80 for 1 energy. And then you also have Spray Splash for extra damage, even on top of that. So really, really powerful attacker. Kingdra's just like a deck that wants to rush the board as soon as possible with Broken Time Space to evolve instantly. And just start wiping your opponent off the board. There's Broken Time Space. Lets you evolve your Pokemon as often as you like. Really important in this deck. Not everyone plays Dusknoir. I really like Dusknoir in this deck. Dusknoir's Dark Palm, once again, you can shuffle in one of your opponent's bench Pokemon if they have 4 or more. And this deck has a really hard time dealing with fire types, so if you're playing against an SP deck and they throw a Blaziken on the board, your Kingdra becomes really bad at attacking, or if they throw like an Infernape. So I play the Dusknoir in here, so that you can shuffle the fire type back into the deck, and then you can swing with Kingdra for maximum damage again. Of course, you can also just swing with Machamp, but also your opponent can play around Machamp and Kingdra at the same time. If they have an unknown G attached to their active Pokemon, Machamp's attack does nothing. So this deck tries to use Dusknoir to get rid of the counters to your Kingdra. So that's my Kingdra Machamp. Really big fan of that deck. It can be a bit obnoxious sometimes because it is so fast and so aggressive, but it's also really, really fun to play. And you can get some really good games playing like LuxApe against the deck, as long as you're not countering it too hard with like some really obnoxious cards. Like if you play like a maxed out Luxray line and you're playing like your fire type to lower the damage and you put down 2 fire types, it might be a little difficult for Kingdra, but it's still a really good deck. I think people underrate Kingdra because of its bad matchup into Gardevoir in this format, but Kingdra wins a lot of other matchups that not every deck can do. Like it does really good into Dalgachomp. It's good. It's decent to LuxChomp, and then there's a lot of decks that like it can just overwhelm like Donphan Prime with weakness or something like that. Next up we have Steelix Prime. I know Steelix is a favorite of Taro's. Steelix is a really bulky Pokemon that tries to just build up a bunch of energy to help your Steelix live attacks, and it's got a bunch of healing cards. So it's called Helix in this format. We played Blissey with Nurse Call. Discard a card from your hand and heal 20 damage from one of your Pokemon. So we heal our Steelix up, make sure it doesn't die. My deck is playing a Claydol engine. I know most Steelix decks do not play the Claydol engine and just play like a supporter draw, but I really like having Claydol in the deck still, so I play Roseanne. That way I can hit my energy cards every single turn, and just Claydol to draw my healing cards. Of course, I think any Steelix deck in this format is not complete unless it's using the Steelix, Heartgold, and Soul Silver energy. Like, come on now, it's just a little on the nose. You got to play the Steelix energy for the Steelix deck, right? Again, there's the Claydol. Most important card in this deck is Special Metal Energy, where if it's attached to your Metal Pokemon, they take 10 less damage. So Steelix wants to build up like 2 or 3 Metal Energy on it, so it takes like 30 less damage from attacks. And with its huge AP, 140 on a stage 1, really, really good. You can just take like almost nothing. Just for reference, Kingdra Prime had 130 on a stage 2. This is a stage 1 with 140, so this guy's pretty big. Then we play healing cards. There's Life Herb and there's Moo Milk. And their only purpose in the deck is just to flip coins and heal Steelix. So if you get heads on the coin flips, you get a bunch of healing off, which is pretty strong. Poke Trainer Hub says Eric Nance is a local and a good friend. Love this deck because of him. That's really cool that your locals to Eric Nance. Very cool. I know he played at the NAIC North American International Championship retro event last year. And he got a pretty good placement with Steelix. I think second place, losing to a Gardevoir in the finals in the 2010 tournament there. Luca asked, do you regret buying into certain formats? Yes. There's some formats where someday I'll definitely sell them off, right? But for now, I get to play a lot of retro over webcam and with my locals. So it's like the regret is from like a place of like, there's formats like 2016 that are just not very fun. For me, but then again, most of the formats that I don't enjoy, I also don't spend that much money on, so it's not that big of a deal. Maybe the biggest one is 2011 Cities. I built that format, and nobody else plays it, so I never get to play my decks. So that's maybe one I regret buying into. Good question, Luca. Thank you. This deck plays this Steelix right here with Headbutt for 20. Seems like a really bad attack, but you can pay it for 1 Double Close Energy, and then it one-shots a Luxray if you boost the damage up. So you hit for weakness. I really like this Onyx. Lets you hit for, with an Expert Belt, 40 damage. With weakness, 80 damage against like Ambipom and Luxray, stuff that is really annoying to your Steelix. And then this deck also plays Plus Power. You do 100 damage with Steelix's main attack. Once you build up to it, Gaia Crush does 100 damage. But why not do 110 or 120 damage with Plus Power? So that you start one-shotting things like Garchomps. So very good. Not really much else to talk about. This deck is pretty simple. I do play Unknown G in my deck, which prevents all effects of attacks done to the Pokemon it's attached to. So there's a lot of ways your opponent can attack Steelix that don't hit for solid damage, like the Dusknoir attack that does 100 damage in the late game. That goes through my Psychic Resistance. That goes through Special Metals. So if you attach Unknown G, we're now immune to that attack. So that's how that works. there's all sorts of like effects of attacks in the format that people use to get through Steelix, because if you're trying to get through Steelix just doing damage, you're playing a losing battle. I'm just going to take a drink real quick, so 1 second, and then we'll get on to the next deck. Alrighty. Next up we have Jumpluff. This is my Jumpluff Alakazam deck that I built using James G's list. Most of my lists are built off of James G's, just a really good deck builder, so I built off of his. This specific one, Jumpluff, is just a really powerful attacker. You want to get Jumpluff on the board as soon as possible to use Mass Attack, which does 10 damage for the number of Pokemon in play, both yours and your opponent's. So you start at 60 damage, obviously, and then start counting your opponent's Pokemon. Usually you're hitting for like 90 to 100 damage, and then you boost the damage up from there as well. This one pairs it with Alakazam. It's a really toxic combo. Power Cancel says once during your turn you can discard 2 cards from your hand and stop one of your opponent's Pokepowers. So against like other evolution decks, you can stop them from using their Claydolls to set up if you get this Alakazam up early. And also you can, against like an SP deck, you can stop them from using their Luxray Bright Look to try to trap you in the active spot. So it's a little bit toxic. I don't enjoy Jumpluff. It's definitely my least favorite 2010 deck, but it's still very powerful, very annoying. The thing about Alakazam, though, is that there is no Kadabra in this format, so it's very hard to get Alakazam in play. This deck chooses to use Celebi Energy, which are one of my favorites. Celebi's my favorite Pokemon. We do have Claydol in here. Claydol is really important for drawing cards, especially in these turbo decks, like Jumpluff. Jumpluff is just trying to get on the board as soon as possible, and then be as annoying as possible, start hitting for when it KOs. And that's why I don't love Jumpluff. It's kind of antithetical to every other 2010 deck, which is like, usually 2010 decks are based around these grindy games. You know, not every deck, like Kingdra's a little faster, right? But usually they're based around using like different attacks, having separate backup plans. Jumpluff is just use one attack, pretty much. Pokeblower, again, is if you play 2, you get a boss sword effect, so Jumpluff gets to gust your opponent. We have Judge to disrupt our opponent's hand against SP decks and against Gyarados. Jumpluff has a really hard time if they get to do whatever they want, so you just get rid of their hand every turn, preferably once you're rolling. Lots of item cards in this deck, you'll see, because this deck is a lot faster, which makes this deck really weak into some matchups. If your opponent starts a Spirit Tomb, this deck can get really run over, which is why we have to play our own Spirit Tomb as a response. So if the opponent starts Spirit Tomb, we throw our Spirit Tomb up. That way we can at least set up like our Claydolls without our item cards. This deck plays a lot of item cards, so it does have a hard time with item lock. And sometimes Jumpluff just has some really bad matchups. It can get donked easily because it has 30 HP on the Hoppips, but it's also just a really obnoxious deck. Really strong deck just because it is so obnoxious, but it's definitely my least favorite. Next up we have Hippowdon. Hippowdon is one of the goofiest decks of all time. It's all based around these 2 Hippowdons right here. The base form Hippowdon is just a really big stage 1, 110 HP, and it has Sand Cover. If he's your active Pokemon, you put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's level X's between turns. So against decks like SP that have like a Uxie level X on their board to draw cards, you start to whittle that down pretty good. And then the main attack of the deck is called Save Sand. It does 20 plus 10 more damage for each energy attached to Hippowdon. But before doing damage, you can get a fighting energy from the discard pile and put it onto Hippowdon. So it's both energy acceleration and it makes your damage do more. And in a lot of matchups, you just want to get a really big Hippowdon and just swing for like 100 to like 180 damage with Hippowdon. Just keep getting energy on there. This is another healing deck like Steelix. We're just going to be playing a bunch of healing cards to keep our Hippowdon alive. That's the goal. It's also got Groundquake, really good attack against SP decks, does 80 damage and 10 to each benched Pokemon that is not an evolved Pokemon. So against SP decks where their entire board is basics, you can spread a bunch of damage with the attack, and then Sand Cover puts more damage on them. It starts to add up. Of course, we have the level X. Hippowdon level X, it gets an extra bit of HP, really important in this deck, and it has Sand Reset, where once during your turn, you can choose each player to shuffle all cards in play, so energy, trainer cards like stadiums, and then like tool cards, you shuffle them all into the deck. You only leave the Pokemon in play. And then that's just the power. Yeah, you kind of just flip the table, say shuffle all the energy, all the stadiums, all the tool cards, and play back into each player's deck. But you can only use Sand Reset once per game. And this is the biggest flaw of Hippowdon, is that you can only use this once per game. And if your opponent cancels it with like a Power Spray or the Alakazam that we just talked about, you just lose access to your power for the entire game. Because a Power Spray and the Power Cancel counts as your power being used. So the way that it's worded, it counts as Sand Reset being used even though it got no effect. So unfortunately, if you get Power Sprayed, you can't use Sand Reset. Also, Double Shoot here, discard 2 fighting energy, and then does 40 snipe to 2 different benched Pokemon your opponent has. Sometimes you use this attack. It's probably the worst attack in the deck, though. You're mainly using Save Sand and Ground Quake, which are really strong. Again, we're playing healing cards like Life Herb and Moo Milk to keep ourselves alive. And the goal is just to get a bunch of energy in play. One of the things that this deck does is it uses Bench Shield, which prevents all damage done to your benched Pokemon by attacks of your opponent's Pokemon. So SP decks like to do a lot of bench damage, and we also do our own bench damage with the Ground Quake attack. So using Bench Shield helps us guard our benched Pokemon, helps us set up these ridiculous combos where our Claydolls can't get KO'd as easily. Speaking of Claydol, there he is, in every evolution deck pretty much. I choose to play Felicity's Drawing. Now this is a pretty divisive choice. You can play Judge in this deck, you can play Professor Oak in this deck. I choose to play Felicity so that you discard up to 2 cards from your hand, and for each one you discard, you draw 3 or you draw 4 if you draw 2 cards, or if you discard 2 and then you draw 4. Sorry, that was worded badly. So the goal is with Hippowdon, that first attack, Save Sand, needs energy in the discard pile if you want to accelerate. So if you discard energy with Felicity's, you then have it in the discard pile, and you can start to really ramp up your damage really fast by just putting energy in the discard pile before you attack. Also relevant is Hippopotas. He's actually an insane attacker as a basic Pokemon. Push Down does 10 and forces the opponent to switch, whatever. But the second attack, Endeavor, does 30 plus 20, and you get to flip 2 coins. So you can do up to 70 damage with Endeavor, 90 damage with an Extra Barrel. I've taken tons of KOs with this Hippopotas before. He's bailed me out a lot. We also have Regirock with Regicycle. Once during your turn, if there's a fighting energy in your discard pile, you can discard 2 cards from your hand, and then you attach the fighting energy to Regirock. So it's another way to get energy in play. Not a good attacker, but he's important because we have Stark Mountain. Stark Mountain says that once during each player's turn, they can choose a fire or fighting energy attached to one of their Pokemon and move it to one of their fire fighting Pokemon. So we can get an energy from the discard pile, attach it to Regirock, and then you move it off to your Hippowdons. It's also good because Hippowdon builds up a ton of energy on itself, but you don't always need all the energy on the Hippowdon, right? Like against a LuxApe deck, you only need to hit 110. So you can use Ground Quake to do exactly 110, and you can just, instead of just keeping the energy all on one Hippowdon so that if it gets knocked out you lose, you can just move the energy to your second Hippowdon on the bench. Notably, we play Double Colorless Energy, give us more damage with our Save Sand. Fighting energy as well can be accelerated back from the discard pile. And Expert Belt makes Hippowdon do more damage, makes it harder to knock out. And if you have Expert Belt attached, Ground Quake does 100 damage, and with the sand-covered Pokebody, it now does 110 to a Garchomp level X, meaning you get a knockout on anything in the LuxApe deck. So, very cool. Dialga's a little bit more difficult, but not all the LuxApes play Dialga. And other than that, that's pretty much the Hippowdon deck. It's a very simple deck, playing some kind of weird cards with Felicity and Bench Shield, but it's a really silly deck. If you're just looking to have a really goofy time, you can just play the Hippowdon deck. It's not a high tier deck in this format. It's definitely like tier 3, one of the less good decks I have, but it is really funny just to like overwhelm like decks like Dialga-Chomp, LuxChomp. You can't overwhelm Gyarados. They hit you for weakness. That's a really bad matchup. But there's a lot of decks that you can just overwhelm with damage. You don't do well against the item lock decks like Cursecar, though. You don't do well against power lock like Gardevoir either. So gotta watch out for those. Next up, we have Donphan Prime. So this one is a classic deck here. We have Donphan with Entei Raikou Legend. Donphan is a super strong stage 1 with 120 HP. And a Pokebody that says Donphan takes 20 less damage from attacks. Really good Pokebody, makes him really bulky, hard to knock out. And for 1 energy, does 60 damage with Earthquake, 60 damage and then 10 to each of your benched Pokemon. So you do have recoil, however, Exoskeleton protects your own Donphans from the recoil of Earthquake. So if you just get a bunch of Donphan to play, they don't damage each other. But just a really powerful, efficient attacker like Kingdra. But this is a stage 1 doing 60 damage for 1 energy. Really, really crazy. And then 90 damage for 3 energy, also a really strong attack. So really bulky, really fast, really strong. We pair that with a card that's really good in the late game, Entei Raikou Legend, which Entei Raikou Legend is a legend card, and you play down both halves of it at one time, and we'll see the attack in a bit, actually. I need to find the other half to find the attack. So let's just quickly browse through the deck, see if we can find the Entei Raikou Legend. There we are. So, Entei Raikou Legend has 2 good attacks. Detonation Spin does 90, and discards a fire energy attached to it. Because we play multi-energy in the deck, this counts as any type of energy. So we can use Detonation Spin, but the main attack we're here for is Thunderfall. Does 80 damage to each Pokemon in play with a Poke Power. Notice these Donphans, they have a Poke Body, so he doesn't get hit. But essentially Donphan's a really strong card in the early game, really good at taking early prize cards, sometimes struggles in the late game though. Once the opponent gets their attackers online, Donphan is less impressive, right? He's still really bulky, really powerful, but just not as strong because he's not doing anything like really annoying, like turning off your opponent's Poke Powers or whatever. So we have Entei Raikou Legend, which with multi-energy can finish off with a Thunderfall. But you may be looking at us like we play Claydol, like we're going to nuke our own Claydols, because Thunderfall does 80 to all Pokemon in play with Poke Powers, not just our opponents. So you have to watch out for that, which is why this deck plays Manectric. Manectric has the Electric Barrier, which says prevent all damage done to your benched Pokemon, excluding Manectric by attacks. So now we can use our Thunderfall without taking any recoil. Just in case your Manectric's prized, though, we also have Bench Shield from the last deck, which prevents damage done to your bench Pokemon from attacks. So really good card. This Donphan deck, like I said, really aggressive. We play Pokeblower in here again to gust our opponent. We play Super Scoop Up. This is really good with Donphan because he's a really bulky 1 energy attacker. And if he gets damaged, we can just pick him back up. So this deck is really fast, really aggressive, and really strong. We play 2 stadiums in this deck. Usually 2010 decks only play 1 stadium. We choose to play 2 here. It's the list that I Nolo built, and then I stole and changed some cards because I was really impressed by it. And you play 2 Broken Time Space and 2 Stark Mountain. Broken Time Space is really good. It lets you evolve instantly. It lets you get the Manectric into play instantly. It lets you get turn 1 attacks with Donphan. It's really good to be able to do that aggression. But Stark Mountain lets you still use the Entei Raikou Legend Energy Switch combo. It's better than just playing like a copy of Energy Switch in the deck. Stark Mountain's really good because it lets you also work with your Donphans. You can move energy around the board. Just really, really good. Really, really good. I love Stark Mountain, Broken Time Space combo in this deck. Very big fan of that. It's a good innovation for this deck. And I'm really happy that it works so well. Again, we're playing Judge. Most 2010 decks are playing Judge because it's just a really good disruption card. Also draws you cards. And we're playing Expert Belt. So our 120 HP Donphan that takes 20 less damage from attacks is actually 140 HP Donphan that takes 20 less damage from attacks. So really bulky, really strong. This deck is just super aggressive. Kind of like Kingdra, trying to take as many early prizes as possible, but also has this Entei Raikou Legend play that it can do in the late game to keep itself on the board. So really fun deck, really powerful. Does have some really bad matchups, like Gyarados is just pretty much unwinnable unless they just somehow play into your Entei Raikou Legend strategy, which is a possibility that they could do, but generally they won't do that. Otherwise, they hit you for weakness, which is really scary. Decks like Kingdra also hit you for weakness, which is scary. Other than that, it's got a pretty good matchups against like LuxApe. It struggles into Dialga Chomp, but that's fine. Other decks, like, it has bad matchups in theory against a lot of other decks, but if you just wipe them off the board before they get set up, then they don't get a chance to do that. So that's a big caveat. If you can beat that Donphan, you actually have to set up. Speaking of more setup-focused decks, here's Dialga Chomp. This is my first SP deck for 2010, and we're 9 decks in already. So kind of crazy. This deck is a combination between Dialga and Garchomp. Garchomp is the all-star card of this format, played in all SP decks. It has the Healing Breath, where when you play it down from your hand to level up your active Garchomp C, you get to heal all damage from all of your SP. So if you're playing against a spread deck, you can just heal all damage off your board. It's also really good with Dialga because Dialga is really bulky and likes getting healed. So that's why we pair these two together. Dragon Rush also has a 3 energy attack, but 2 energy if you use an energy gain, and it actually takes only 1 energy with the double colorless energy, and it just does 80 damage snipe. You discard 2 energy attached to Garchomp, so just discard your double colorless, and then you do 80 snipe. And it can't use Dragon Rush twice in a row, 2 turns in a row, rather. Unless you switch them out of the active and switch them back in, which is something this deck does. This deck, I think, is the best deck in 2010. It does have some rough matchups into like Kingdra, but otherwise, Machamp is just a really strong deck that doesn't have a lot of bad matchups. It's slow, so it can be overwhelmed, but it's just a very flexible and strong deck with a lot of teching potential. I think a lot of people do hurt their Machamp decks by cutting out its techs and focusing way too much on the Dialga, which leaves it kind of... you leave yourself without options. This deck likes having options, and if you take those options away, it will struggle. But really, really strong deck regardless. Bronzong is a really key SP Pokemon that I haven't even talked about yet. Galactic Switch says once in your turn, you can move an energy from one of your Pokemon SP to another Pokemon in play. Another one of your Pokemon in play, and then Bronzong takes 20 damage. So this is in every SP deck pretty much, because just being able to move energy around your board is just really good. Especially with Poketurn, being able to pick up Pokemon, you can move an energy off of a Pokemon before you pick it up. That way you keep energy in play. So Bronzong's really, really good in every SP deck. Again, we're playing the SP cards like Power Spray, Poketurn, all that stuff that you've already seen before. And Dialga here is just really good. It has tons of good attacks. Dialga G has 100 HP for a basic, really big. And it has the Deafen attack, where it says 10 damage. Your opponent can't play any item cards or stadium cards from their hand. Back then it said trainer, but what it means is item cards. So really, really strong, locking your opponent out of trainer cards and stadium cards. And while it only does 10 damage, in this format you have Expert Belt, which makes it do 30 damage while locking your opponent out. Really, really powerful attack. And Second Strike does 50 damage, but if your opponent already has 20 damage on them, it does 50 plus 20 more. So essentially, if they already have 20 damage on them, you're doing 70 damage. So 90 damage total. Really, really strong attack for cleaning up KOs after you have locked your opponent down with Deafen. We also have the Level X, gives you 20 more HP. And Time Crystal, maybe the best Pokebody in the format, turns off all other Pokebodies besides Pokemon SP. So Nidoqueen, Spiritomb, Hippowdon. We just talked about a bunch of different Pokebodies. Steelix Prime is Pokebody. You just shut them down with your Dialga Level X. Also has Remove Lost, maybe the scariest attack around, that does 80 damage, and flip a coin until you get tails. For each heads, you take an energy attached to the defending Pokemon and put it in the Lost Zone, which is just really annoying. Because sometimes you'll be having a really good game against Machamp, and they just flip a couple heads on the attack and strip all of your energy off of your active Pokemon. So this is probably my least favorite attack in the format. I really wish it just flipped one coin instead of flip a coin until you get tails, but it is what it is. If you want to play against Dialga, you got to be really careful for that Remove Lost. But also you got to be careful. Don't get yourself locked down with your items. It's really hard to play if you can't play your items under Deafen. Of course, double colorless energy, really, really strong in this deck, not only just for Dialga, which takes a bunch of colorless energy, but also Garchomp can Dragon Rush for just 1 energy attachment, which is really strong. We do play Uxie as well for draw. And some really nice metal energy here. I'm a really big fan of these Pop Series 9 basic energy cards. Big fan of these. So, those are fun. Energy Gain, once again, makes your attacks cost 1 energy less. So with Garchomp, you make your attacks cost, your Dragon Rush cost 2 energy, and then you can attach a double colorless, and it pays for the attack cost. So really, really strong combo in this format. There's some Uxies. There's 3 Uxies, in fact. Cyrus is the beating heart of all these SP decks. We're playing him, of course. And then the other big part of this deck is Special Metal Energy. We've talked about this card with Steelix before. But it makes you take 10 less damage from attacks, so Dialga can get really bulky with the Special Metal Energy and Expert Belt giving you 20 more HP, and so you can get like 170 HP on a Dialga. And then if they damage you a bunch, you can then switch into this Garchomp here and heal off all damage with Healing Breath, or you can just Poketurn the trainer card that just picks up one of your Pokemon SP. So if, let's say, you damage my Dialga a bunch, okay, I'll just pick it up, right? Like, I don't care. There's the regular basic Garchomps for the deck. I do play Dragonite FB. This is a counter for opposing SP decks. Mach Blow, if the defending Pokemon is an SP, it does 80 damage. So this is good against opposing Garchomps since you hit them for weakness, and also against cards like Blaziken, which are Fire SP Pokemon that would otherwise threaten your Dialga. We also have Ambipom, one of my favorite SP cards here, with its tail code to move energy and snap attack to hit for 60 damage. Really good at taking swift knockouts on opposing Garchomps and also taking knockouts on like weak basic Pokemon. But also tail code's really good in this format because against, let's just say I'm playing against a deck that like Gardevoir that takes 3 energy to attack, I can move one of their energy off their attacker, and then if they try to draw more cards with Claydol to find the energy again, I Power Spray them so they can't find it. And then Ambipom can take the last energy off their attacker if they try to power it up again. So, very, very strong. Toxicroak here, really good. Poison Revenge does 60 damage and poisons the opponent if one of your Pokemon was knocked out by damage from an attack. So, really, really good card. In any SP deck, pretty much you're going to play Toxicroak. People that cut Toxicroak undersell how good it is. It's not just to KO Luxray with Fighting Weakness. There's plenty of other things with Fighting Weakness in this format, including Magnezone and Regigigas, which is really helpful against. And Toxicroak in specific is also good against Blaziken. Again, Blaziken has 110 HP, but its attack makes it take 40 more damage during the next turn. So you hit for exactly 110 damage once poison is taken into account. So Toxicroak, really good, efficient card. Dialga's kind of obnoxious, like I said. It's kind of a bulky deck. You're aiming to just build up big Dialga and make it hard to KO, and then pick off your opponent's board with Garchomp. It's also got Warp Energy. This is a really big card in this deck in specific. Warp Energy you attach to your active Pokemon, and it switches it to the bench. So I can attach the Warp Energy to Dialga, and then switch into Garchomp, and play Garchomp down to heal, because when you level up, you have to be in the active spot. So switch into Garchomp, level it up to get the healing effect, and then Garchomp has free retreat, so I can just move back into the Dialga. Again, one of the nastiest combos in this deck is with Bronzong E4. So here's my Bronzong here. If let's just get a Garchomp out for the effect of this as well. So let's just say my board is a Dialga and some metal energies of some kind. I can do this. Let me find my Garchomp level X again, actually. I need that as well for this demonstration. There we are. You can Warp Energy the Dialga into the Garchomp, and then heal all damage off your Dialga with the Garchomp. And then with the Bronzong, let me just quickly find one. We need a Poke Turn. There we are. We can use our Galactic Switch to move the energy off of Dialga to our Garchomp, and then I can pick up the Garchomp and reuse the Warp Energy later. So Warp Energy is a super high value card because you get to use it multiple times. Really, really strong. Dialga-Chomp, one of the best decks of the format. Easily, I think it's the best deck, especially if you play cards like Toxicroak and like Ambipom. You give yourself so many options that it just makes it really strong. Why am I shuffling the deck? I'm just going to put that in the deck box. So we are 9 decks down into 2010. Decent progress. Let's keep going. I have so many 2010 decks, it's very hard to talk about them all. But we'll get through all the 2010 decks today, hopefully. And then we'll make it to like 2011 onwards next time, probably. Next up, we have Tangrowth. Tangrowth level X is another kind of not very good deck. Tier 3, but it has some unique advantages. It's another tank deck. Being that it's grass type, it has a water resistance, so it's resistant to Gyarados and Kingdra, so it really does really good in those matchups. And it's also just really good against LuxApe. Very bad against decks like Dialga, very bad against any types of fire types that hit you for weakness. Very scary. Essentially, Tangrowth is really big, and Healing Growth says once during your turn, flip a coin. If heads, heal 4 damage counters one of your Pokemon. So again, another healing attack. We pair this with Shaman, which makes each of my grass Pokemon have 40 more HP. So you buff your Tangrowth up to 170 HP. This is really important because of this Tangrowth right here, which has the Swallow Up attack. before doing damage, you count the remaining HP of Tangrowth and whatever you're attacking, and if Tangrowth has more HP than what you're attacking, you do 120 damage with the attack. So against like a LuxApe deck, I have 130 HP, I'm going to swing for 120 and take a knockout on like a Garchomp. Or against something like Gardevoir, you can put the Shaman in play, now you have 170 HP, now you swing for 120 into a Gardevoir. So just a really big HP deck. Again, we're playing these healing cards and Expert Belt. Very common card, Expert Belt, to keep us alive. We also have this Tangrowth right here, which is good for Stick and Absorb, which does 60 and heals 30 from Tangrowth, and then your opponent can't retreat. So the goal is to just swing for like 80 damage and then heal yourself. So you swing with Expert Belt, right, for 80 damage, and then heal yourself. In combination with Healing Growth and all the goofy little healing cards we play in the deck, kind of makes it hard to knock you out. This deck, again, not the best deck in the world, but it is a fun little rogue deck. I definitely recommend building the meta decks for this format before you build the rogue decks, but this one's still cute. There's also this Shaman right here with Celebration Wind. When you play it down from your hand to your bench, you can move your energy around your board however you like. So this is, we need a Shaman to level up into Shaman level X anyway, so we just play this one because it's got a really good Poke Power. Some people forget that Shaman's actually legal in this format because this Shaman's really good in 2012, but doesn't really see that much play in this format. But it's really good if your opponent's just playing like Ambipom, moving your energy around your board. You can slam this down and move the energy back. Other than that, this deck, again, is playing all the healing card stuff. It's not a very unique deck. This is one of the decks I don't play that often, to be honest, because it's kind of sacky. A lot of its matchups are really, really good or really, really bad. So it's not a deck I play too often. Next up, we have Gardevoir. This is arguably another one of the best decks in the format. It's, Gengar, Gardevoir, Dialga. These are all really, really strong decks. Gyarados as well. Gardevoir's all based around the regular Gardevoir, which we have to find. Where is it? Alrighty. Come on, where's Gardevoir? There we are. Excellent. So Gardevoir has the Psychic Lock attack, which does 60 damage and locks your opponent out of using their Poke Powers during their next turn. So just one of the best attacks ever printed on a card. You do 60 damage and you just prevent your opponent from using any Poke Powers during their next turn. Really, really strong. The goal is to just spam this attack over and over again, and it's really hard for the opponent to respond. Gardevoir doesn't just have that, though. It also has Telepass, which once during your turn, you can look at your opponent's discard pile and steal a supporter card there and use it as the effect of Telepass. So if your opponent, let's just say, played down like Cyrus's Conspiracy, you can steal that, and you actually get to use 2 supporters per turn now, because you get to use your supporter and you get to steal one of theirs. So really, really strong. You also level up. You get 20 more HP. You get Teleportation, which allows you to switch Gardevoir around your board however you like. And then you get Bring Down, which is just an attack, a really obnoxious attack, in fact, that does, you choose the Pokemon in play with the fewest remaining HP and just knock it out. This wins so many games because there's a lot of times where Gardevoir can struggle sometimes in the late game if the opponent has a fully set up Pokemon like a Steelix to knock out. But you can use Bring Down to like take out one of their benched Pokemon that's the lowest HP in play. Gardevoir pairs really well with Gallade because it's in the same evolutionary line. Gallade has 2 attacks, though this deck doesn't play any fighting energy, so we'll only talk about Psychic Cut. Psychic Cut does 60 plus 20, and you do 20 more for each prize card you flip over. So this is a really unique attack effect that I talked about in one of my videos, in fact. So let's just say we have 6 prize cards left, and we're attacking with Gallade. Gallade does 60 damage, and let's just say the opponent has 140 HP. I can choose to flip over 4 prize cards, and I now do 140 damage. Now you can't flip them back, so they're kind of like, it's kind of like a gun with 6 bullets. You get 6 shots with this Gallade, and if you also take prize cards before you get to flip them, like let's just say I don't have any flipped and my Gardevoir takes 3 prize cards before my Gallade even gets in there, Gallade only has 3 prize cards left to flip. But still, really strong attacker, helps Gardevoir deal with like the annoying things that it can't otherwise deal with. We also have Nidoqueen in the deck, of course, because Nidoqueen's really good. It heals your Pokemon in between turns. Pairs really well with Gardevoir because Gardevoir can switch around the board very easily. And if your opponent doesn't take a 1-hit KO on Gardevoir, let's just say they hit for 60 damage, just switch to another Gardevoir and start attacking with that one while Nidoqueen heals your damage off. So really, really strong card. We also play Spirit Tomb to help us set up. Darkness Grace, of course, helps set up our board, and Keystone Seal locks out trainers. So a lot of times you go from locking your opponent out of trainer cards and making it really difficult for decks like LuxApe to set up their board. And then you switch into Gardevoir and you start locking them out of powers. And usually you also pair Gardevoir's attack, we'll talk about that in a sec, with Judge, which is in here somewhere. I promise I play Judge in the deck. They're just all at the bottom, apparently. There we are. So Judge is a supporter card, remember, that says each player shuffles their hand to their deck and draws 4 cards. So Gardevoir locks your opponent out of powers, and then you get rid of their hand. It's really annoying, basically, is the summary of it. You lock their opponent out of powers, you get rid of their hand, you make it really annoying, and with Expert Belt, Gardevoir actually hits for 80 damage. So Gardevoir's not that much of a slacker of an attacker either. Does a lot of damage. 80 damage is going to KO a lot of Pokemon SP, going to KO a lot of like weaker Pokemon. And it's also important to know that this deck plays Azelf level X. Every deck wants to play this Azelf, but only Gardevoir gets to take advantage of Azelf level X. Azelf level X says that each of your Psychic Pokemon have no weakness. So, Gardevoir's... The biggest way to counter Gardevoir is to hit it with something like a Uxie level X's Zen Blade for a lot of damage. Azelf just turns off your weakness. It also has a really good attack, Deep Balance, that does, you choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, and then you do 10 damage to that Pokemon for each energy your opponent has in play on all of their Pokemon. So let's just say your opponent has like 8 energy in play, you're now sniping 80 damage. So it's also a really strong attacker. This card was also in the Curse Guard deck, but it's really good here too. Moonlight Stadium gives free retreat to Psychic and Dark Pokemon. So Spirit Tomb gets free retreat, Gardevoir gets free retreat, really strong. This deck also plays Dusknoir. Dusknoir is really important. Claydol, also really important, very good card. My favorite card in this deck is this Jason Klaczynski signed Gardevoir. I only play 2 signed cards in my whole collection in my decks, but this one was really cool, getting to meet Jason Klaczynski and get a Gardevoir signed because he won the World Championships in 2008 with Gardevoir. So not this year, but 2 years prior to this format, he did win the World Championships with Gardevoir as his star. So very nice Gardevoir there. Other than that, the reason Gardevoir is so good in this format is because of the double colorless energy. It just makes it so easy to attack with Psychic Lock very early on and to power up multiple attackers at once. And things like, Dusknoir and Nidoqueen, it helps a lot. Gardevoir is really, really good. It's not my favorite deck to play in this format, but it's definitely really strong. Very respected meta deck. So Gardevoir, there it is. It's one of the decks where if you're playing in this format, you have to have a plan for Gardevoir. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time. Like, Kingdra is a really good deck, but it doesn't have a great plan for Gardevoir, so that kind of holds it back sometimes in tournaments if it has to run into a Gardevoir. Next up, we have Amphisnow. This is a bit of a rogue deck from the format. Essentially, Ampharos and Abomasnow combine together really well. Abomasnow has the Snowplay attack, which does 20 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon that are not grass or water. I hate this restriction so much because it means you auto-lose against Jumpluff because all their Pokemon that you damage are... Well, you can't damage the Jumpluff, they're grass, right? It also means you have a really hard time against Gyarados. I don't know why they put the restriction on this attack, but it really hurts. It's really sad. Essentially, though, you want to spread damage with Abomasnow because Ampharos says that each Pokemon with damage counters on them can't use any of their Pokepowers. So, spread the damage with Abomasnow, put the Ampharos in play, which stops your opponent using any Pokepowers. It's really annoying. Against SP decks, you may be saying, oh, well, can't they just heal with Garchomp? Well, they would be able to, but if you have the damage counters on them and they try to use the Garchomp to level up, it stops it because they can't use it because of damage bind. Abomasnow is also just a pretty good stage 1. It's got a Snow Veil, which reduces damage done to your Pokemon in play if it's active by 20. So it's kind of like Donphan's thing that makes you take 20 less. But unlike Donphan, you also guard your benched Pokemon. So if Garchomp tries to go for a Dragon Rush on like your benched Flaffy, it will only do 60 damage and Flaffy survives. So that's really cool. It also just makes Abomasnow, even though you've only got 100 HP, you get a little bit bulkier from having that body. There's also the below 0 attack does 60 damage, and if you evolve from Snover, you get to paralyze the opponent. This is a pretty hard effect to pull off efficiently because you really don't want to be putting lots of energy on Snovers, but I have used the paralysis effect before. Mainly, this is just a good attack for cleaning up. When you have the opponent locked down under the damage bind combo, you have the option of either spreading continuously with Snow Play or just starting to slug through their Pokemon with below 0. So a lot of times against SP, you will just want to start slugging them with below 0. We also have, because this deck can't play Claydol, because Claydol would get turned off if your opponent put any damage on it, we play the Lake Trio, so we have all these playdown effects that don't get turned off by Ampharos. So this one, of course, locks your opponent's Poke Powers out, so it makes it easier to disrupt your opponent. We also have Uxie for our card draw. When you play Uxie from your hand or your bench, you draw until you have 7 in hand. So instead of playing Claydol, we just play lots of Uxie. And we also have Super Scoop Up to reuse our Pokemon, pick them back up. Double Colorless Energy, again, really good for powering up your Snow Play attack really fast. And then there's one other really key card in this deck that we need to find real quick. We'll talk about that in a second too. There we are, Azelf. So once again, Azelf, if you forgot, if you have Azelf, Mesprit, and Uxie in play, you make the cost of your opponent's attacks of their basic Pokemon cost 1 more. So against LuxApe in specific, you want to play down all 3 of these and make it really hard for them to attack. Against Algashop, this deck is really bad. This deck has a lot of bad matchups, frankly. It is definitely one of the worst of my decks. It's unfortunately not very good, but it is kind of a fun deck. It's a neat little combo that took top 16 at that year's World Championships. I believe top 16. Here's a fun one. We have Uxie. So a lot of people ask, how do I afford all of my decks? Well, the thing is that not all of my cards are minty. In fact, most of them are at least like moderately played. Some of them, like this Uxie right here, are horribly played. Like this card is terrible. Like this is a very, very ugly card. So nice and terrible looking. Unfortunately, when you own this many decks, not all of your cards can be perfect. So for decks that I play a lot less, like this one, they get the cards that are less minty. So that's just how it is. Hopefully everyone is enjoying the stream still. We are through 12 of the 2010 decks. We're just going to go through 2010 today, so I got like 20 more decks to go. And then I'll be stopping stream, so it'll probably be a decently long stream to get through the 2010 decks alone. But it's worth doing. Next up we have Magnezone. This is one of my absolute favorite decks in this format. I did a whole hour-long deck profile on Magnezone if you want to go back and watch that. And it hasn't changed that much. Essentially, Magnezone is another hit-and-run deck. So where's our Spirit Tombs at? We're going to need that guy. We're going to need that guy. And we're going to need that guy. And we're going to need... Let me just get all the cards we'll need. That way I can just kind of present this a little bit quicker. I kind of want to start getting through these decks a little bit faster. That's most of the cards we'll need. So, we're another hit-and-run deck. So against SP, our goal is to use the Gyro Ball attack, which does 60 damage, 80 if we have an Expert Belt on, and then we force each player to switch their active Pokemon. So we want to switch, of course, into Spiritomb, which locks the opponent out of item cards. This deck, though, unlike Cursecar, has a lot of different options. It's not as strong as Cursecar because Cursecar hits Psychic Weakness and has like the free retreat, Stadium, and all that. But this deck does have some neat tricks. One of the coolest things is the Poke Power on this guy, Super Connectivity. Says once during your turn, you can search your discard pile for a Lightning or Metal Energy, including these special ones, and then just attach to your active. And then the active takes 10 damage. But this essentially, it's really good having Energy Acceleration. I don't like playing cards like Felicity in this deck that discard cards to play into this effect, but it's really good to have around. You kind of want to keep a steady board and just maintain energy in play, so it's really good to be able to re-accelerate those. We also have 3 other Magnezones in this deck. This Magnezone right here, he's just really good for nuking the opponent. Metallic Bolt does 120 damage if you discard a Lightning and Metal Energy attached to it. So just a really strong nuke attacker. I really like him. This guy right here, probably the coolest attacker in the deck. He has a little bit less HP, but he's a metal type, so he gets to take less damage from attacks with the special Metal Energy. And he has the Magnetized body, which gives all of your Pokemon with Metal Energy attached free retreat. So with him, you can give your Spiritombs free retreat to move in and out of the active spot, meaning you can hit and run over and over again. And he's also got the Metal Blast attack, which does 50 plus 10 for each metal energy attached to Magnezone. And this is your strongest strategy in this deck, is against decks like Gardevoir that have, that rely on hitting with like Psychic Lock. You can attach a bunch of special metal energies to reduce the damage they do, and then you can just, in the late game, just swing with Metal Blast for like 110 damage against a Gardevoir, and slowly kind of whittle them away, right? That's the goal with this guy. So you have 3 different Magnezone to attack with, and of course you have a level X. This level X here has the Electric Trans Pokepower, which says that as often as you like, you may move lightning or metal energy around your board. So because it says as often as you like, your opponent can't, well, they can Power Spray, but it doesn't do anything. So if your opponent plays a Power Spray, you still get to use Electric Trans as often as you like. So all this energy that we accelerate into play, we can move around our board. It's really good. One of the best things with this deck is just you want to get your attachment every single turn. Just find your energy and get it in play. That way, once you get the level X, you can move it around. Again, it's a metal type, so we can actually level up our lightning guys and turn them into metal, meaning that they take less damage. This deck also plays a secret little tech here called Sunny Shore City Gym that I started playing not too long ago, where it says that your Pokemon that are lightning, their damage is not affected by resistance. This effect is not that relevant. What's really good, though, is that your lightning Pokemon in play don't have weakness. So against LuxApe, a lot of times they'd headhunt your lightning Magnezones with fighting weakness with their Toxicroaks, which take it out with a one-shot. So you play down the Sunny Shore, now you don't have weakness, which is really cool. Magnezone also has this really cool attack, Cyber Shock. You discard a lightning and a metal from the Magnezone, and it does 80 damage and paralyzes them. So you can loop paralysis on the opponent by discarding the energy, and then you can re-accelerate back into play. I really like having all 3 Magnezone here. It just gives the deck so many options of attackers, and it's just I think it's an underrated deck. It's not a top meta deck because it does struggle with fire types. It doesn't have a way to play around that weakness as easily as the lightning ones, but still really strong. This Magnezone is also super beat up. Again, really beat up card, but this Magnezone is really special to me because this is actually the first ever level X card that I pulled. I did not get it from a pack. I got it from one of those random Walmart repacks back in like 2008 because they actually used to put good cards in there. But this was the first ever level X that I got. So I have a lot of attachment to that Magnezone. So very happy to be able to play Magnezone and it be a pretty good deck. I think this is a underrated deck in the format. You can take on Dialga Chomp as long as you get a solid start. You can take on LuxApe as long as you play very carefully. That's the thing, is this deck is not as forgiving as Cursegar. It's a lot harder to play. There's a lot. It's both easier and harder to play depending on how your games and your matchups go, I guess. But it's got a lot of different tricks that it can get up to. Next up, we have Regigigas. This is a very cool rogue deck from the format. Not a super meta deck, but it is pretty cool. And it's based around using Mesprit again. We talked about Palkia Lock. You play down Mesprit, and then you try to get out of play. So Mesprit, you play it down, your opponent loses access to their Poke Powers during their next turn. Regigigas can get Pokemon out of play, and we also have Super Scoop Up, which can pick up your Mesprits and get them out of play. So there's lots of different ways to both reuse Mesprit and get it out of play as well. We play the full Uxie Mesprit as Elf combo in here because this deck takes advantage of them better than literally any other deck. And we also play Time Space Distortion to recover our Pokemon. Let's just find our Regigigas real quick. There we are. So the main thing this deck does is you want to set up these guys right here, your Regigigas, and then you level it up into Regigigas level X for a ton of HP. So he has 150 HP, and it has the Sacrifice Pokepower, which once during your turn, you can choose one of your Pokemon in play and knock it out. You then get to search your discard pile for up to 2 basic energy and attach them to this Regigigas, and you get to heal 80 damage from it. So you get to knock out one of your Pokemon, which seems bad, your opponent gets a prize, but you're clearing your board. So you knock out a Mesprit, and then you put it back down again. So you wanna use these like once per turn effects on your opponent, and just kind of be really annoying by turning off their Poke Powers, and then hitting them with the Giga Blaster attack, which does 100 damage. It does huge cost, metal, fighting, water, colorless for 100 damage. and you discard a random card from their hand and the top card of their deck. And you can't use it twice in a row. But you can use the attack Giga Hammer, which is just a really strong 80 damage attack. And you also have Drag Off, which does 30, and you get to, before doing damage, you can choose to bring up one of your one's bench Pokemon and attack that instead. So just some really good attacks on this guy, but it's another tank deck, though this one does play a lot differently, because it plays more like Palkia Lock. You're trying to lock your opponent out. And with Expert, well, you have 170 HP, and you just kind of want to build up your Regigigas slowly, and then just keep it alive with healing cards, like Moo Milk, and then this deck plays Poke Healer Plus. You want to keep it alive while just disrupting your opponent by turning off their access to Poke Powers. You limit their hand, and then you discard random cards from their hand and their deck. And eventually, if you attack with this card like 5-6 times, you're going to hit like 12 cards. You're going to start hitting relevant cards from your opponent. So, like I said, it's not the most broken deck in the format. It really struggles with fighting types like Donphan and Machamp. But it is really, really cool. Also struggles with Gallade. Gallade is terrible. Pray you do not hit Gallade. But Regigigas is really, really cool. Really, really cool deck. Love that guy. Less cool deck, we have Garchomp from Supreme Victors here. This deck is a bit of a combo deck where we need Lumineon, please. Thank you. So Garchomp is a really powerful attacker, but he has a terrible weakness to Colorless, meaning that you get one shot by Garchomp level X. Your main attack is Speed Impact. It does 120 minus 20 for each energy attached to the defending Pokemon. So if your opponent has 3 energy attached to them, your damage output is just like halved, which is really bad. So our goal is that we need to just like use Lumineon, which steals Pokemon from your opponent's hand and puts them into play, so that Garchomp has things to attack. And then because Lumineon puts extra Pokemon in play, Dusknoir's Dark Palm is there to shuffle them away. So the combo is you put extra Pokemon in play with Lumineon, and then you get rid of them. So if your opponent has 4 more Pokemon in play, Dusknoir gets activated. And then you also give Garchomp free attacks. Because Garchomp's, I'm not going to lie, Garchomp's pretty bad. But the goal is just to always have something for Garchomp to attack for a one-hit KO. Zacharoni asks, does not having a resistance hold back Regigigas? Compared to like Steelix, absolutely. That's one of the best qualities of a card like Steelix, is that it has a resistance. But Regigigas is kind of in its own, I'm not going to say it's an own league. It's not like it's better than Steelix, but it plays very differently. So it has 170 HP still. Like it doesn't have a resistance, which obviously hurts, but like it's still really bulky. The best thing that Regigigas could get would be a card that prevents all effects of attacks, so you can't get hit with like Ambipom, Tailcode, or Machamp's Takeout, but it doesn't have that. Other than that, Garchomp is just, it uses all these special energy, like Cyclone Energy, which forces your opponent to switch. Again, the goal is just to always give your Garchomp something to attack for a one-hit KO, and just hope your opponent can't one-hit KO you back. This Garchomp deck, not very good though. Definitely one of my least favorite decks to play, just because it has a really hard time whiffing energy cards. Next up, I'll show these two decks together to save some time because they're not that much different. We have LuxChomp and LuxChomp with Blaziken. So, LuxChomp is the most iconic deck of this format. It pairs LuxChomp with Garchomp. Both very efficient and powerful attackers. We talked about Garchomp doing 80 snipe, and Luxray, of course, has the Boss's Orders ability and also does 60 damage and hits lightning weakness. So really, really powerful cards. And you play these two and a bunch of other tech cards, like tech attackers like Uxie and like Toxicroak, like Roserade and Ambipom. Lots of different tech attackers you can play in this deck. The most important card in all of these SP decks that are toolboxes is this Lucario, which makes all weakness in play ×2. I haven't talked about it this live stream yet, but big basic Pokemon like Regigigas and SP Kais have ×2 weakness, but stage 2s like Gardevoir do not. So if you want to take a one-shot on Pokemon, you need to put this guy down to make weakness ×2. Again, this is a toolbox of attackers, so you're going to see a lot of just SP attackers like Driftblim and Luxray as like your secondary attackers. The big difference with Blaziken is that Blaziken is just a really, really good attacker, so it's worth naming the deck after it. So we play Blaziken and Blaziken FB conveniently on top there. That was convenient. So this is a LuxApe deck, but this one plays Blaziken. Blaziken FB has the Luring Flame attack, where you get to switch in one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to the active spot. It's like a Boss's Orders effect. But that new Pokemon's burned. So what this is really good for is against a deck that plays Claydol. You can bring Claydol active, and not only does Claydol have a big retreat, but if he's burned, he can't use his ability, since back then Poke Powers were turned off by special conditions. So you can bring up the Claydol, turn it off. Really, really strong. And the main thing here is that you want to level up Blaziken eventually, because he's got 110 HP. You now hit Fire Weakness, which is one of the best weaknesses to hit for stuff like Steelix Prime, Dialga, Torterra level X, all kinds of different guys that get hit with Fire Weakness. And Blaziken has the Jet Shoot attack, which does 80 damage, and so it's just really efficient attacks, and it only takes 1 energy attachment. It does 80 damage, and then Blaziken takes 40 more from attacks during your next turn. So Blaziken's just a glass cannon. He's in there to just take a one-hit KO with weakness, or be really annoying with Luring Flame by trapping your opponent in the active spot. And he's just a really powerful tech slot. So you just play one Blaziken level X, and 1 Fire Energy. And then it's otherwise, like I said, LuxApe deck. So not going to go over the rest of that, just because it's kind of redundant to talk about LuxApe twice. We'll be getting there, don't worry. There's another LuxApe, now that I think about it. So, Flygon Dusknoir is the next deck. This is a rogue deck. Not the strongest deck, but it's a very cool deck. Flygon Dusknoir is using Flygon again, which we've talked about plenty of times, and Dusknoir, which we have not covered at all. So let's just get out most of the relevant pieces so I can talk about those. And this is not a deck you'll see very often, so because this deck is not super good into the meta, but it's also really, really fun to play. So once again, we have Mewtwo level X. This card can't be damaged by basic Pokemon, so against LuxApe, this deck is a horrible LuxApe matchup. You just throw a Mewtwo at them, and you just hope they can't deal with it. That's what Mewtwo's here for. Flygon, once again, really annoying attacker. Can deck your opponent out with Wind Erosion. Extreme Attack is 150 damage snipe on a level X. And then this guy right here lets your Pokemon retreat for free and is a solid attacker. Flygon is here for kind of just giving the deck a stable base and giving the deck options to stall the opponent out. Why would we want to stall the opponent out? Well, Dusknoir level X has the Poke Power Ectoplasm. If this is your active Pokemon is knocked out by damage from opponent's attack, you put Dusknoir level X in play as a Stadium card, and he puts 10 damage on each of your opponent's Pokemon in between turns. So the goal is that you want them to knock out your Dusknoir Stadium, and then you want to stall them out. One way to do that is Mewtwo level X, which can just sit in the active spot. Another way to do that is with Flygon, which can drag Pokemon into the active spot, be really annoying, or also just swing really hard against opponents. Again, this doesn't have a good LuxApe matchup unless you just play Mewtwo like I do to hard counter it, but that's why it's there. We also play 3 different Dusknoir attackers. One of them is, of course, the Dark Palm Dusknoir, which is really good in this deck specifically. I mean, you play Dusknoir anyway, you might as well. But this deck also plays Honchkrow, which puts Pokemon from your opponent's discard pile back into play. And the goal with this, of course, is that you put more Pokemon in play, so Dark Palm can activate, because Dark Palm only works if your opponent has 4 or more Pokemon in play. So your opponent will try to play around that, so you try to put more Pokemon in play, that way they can't play around it. That's essentially the goal. These are the 2 attacking Dusknoirs mainly. This Dusknoir right here, if he's in the active spot, you put 1 damage counter on your opponent's Pokemon with energy in between turns. Really, really annoying effect that can stack up damage on their opponent's board. And with this guy in play, you put even more damage on them, so you kind of force your opponent to deal with it really quickly. It's also got Darkness Mist, which does 60 plus 20 if your opponent already has 2 or more damage counters on it. So against decks like Gardevoir, you can stack damage on them ahead of time with something like Spirit Pulse, and then Darkness Mist swings for 80 damage and then 110 with weakness. So it's a really strong attack. Because it costs Psychic Double Close, you can actually pay for the attack pretty easily. Everything else in this deck is very expensive, such as this guy right here. This is the main Dusknoir of the deck, though. Shadow Command, you put 2 damage counters on this guy, and then you draw 2 cards. Really weird ability. You take 20, you draw 2 cards, and then you discard cards from your hand until you only have 6 left. So, it's a really, really weird effect, but essentially you get a little bit of a draw engine, and you get damage on this Dusknoir. And the reason you want damage on him is for the damage even attack, which you count the number of damage counters on Dusknoir, and then you snipe that on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So if Dusknoir has 80 damage on him, I get to snipe 80 on one of my opponent's guys. So just a really strong, really annoying attack. You kind of want to send this guy in as like a, kind of like, you're kind of throwing him there to die. You want to throw him into the active spot and level him up. And you're going to damage him ahead of time with Shadow Command. That way the opponent wants to get rid of him. Because he's going to be really threatening. You're going to be sniping a bunch of damage on the opponent's board. But if they do knock it out, then they activate your Stadium card, right? He's also got the Night Spin attack, which does 50. And then it prevents all damage done to Dusknoir from Pokemon that have 2 or less energy attached. So against Gyarados and Jumpluff, your goal is to just spam this attack. And then if they do build up energy, you try to shuffle away their Pokemon with energy attached with this guy and Honchkrow. So it's kind of a weird deck. It's hard to explain. You'd have to see it in action to actually see how it works. It's definitely not the best deck in the world because it's really hard to play. It's kind of bricks because there's so many one-of cards in this deck. It's kind of a difficult deck, but it's very cool. Next up, we'll go through these next 2 much faster. We have the 2 World Championship decks for this year, or 2 of them. We have Power Cottonweed. This is another Jumpluff deck. Again, Jumpluff just does 10 for each Pokemon in play. This one is just focused upon going as fast as possible through the deck. Plays lots of setup cards, lots of damage boosts. There's not much that's that different about it than my other Jumpluff, other than the fact that this is aiming to go as fast as possible. It's like all holds barred. There's not any way to gust your opponent. You just kind of swing into whatever they got and just try to take 6 prizes as fast as possible. This deck won the Juniors Division of the year. I just don't want to go over it too long because, again, we have a lot of decks to get to. We also have Boltivore. This is the 2nd place deck from the Masters Division, Michael Premwant. This is another Gardevoir Gallade deck. Similar strategy. The only different thing in here, really, is Machamp with the Takeout attack, which just helps you knocks out a Pokemon that isn't evolved. So against SP, you have a really fast and efficient attacker, and because of that, we play Fighting Energy in the deck, which is somewhere in the deck. There it is, Fighting Energy. And because you play Fighting Energy, you can also use Gallade's attack, Sonic Blade, which is his first attack that I never mentioned before because it's not relevant in the other deck. But Sonic Blade puts damage counters on your opponent until they have 50 HP remaining, and then it switches them out. So essentially against cards like Steelix, again, that are really big, hard to knock out, you can put a bunch of damage on them with Sonic Blade. So that's kind of what this deck does. Because it plays Fighting Energy, you get access to play you get access to Gallade's attack, and you get access to use Machamp, which is just a really strong attacker against SP decks. Next up we have Metagon. This is a homebrew where I paired Metagross with Flygon. So Metagross is a really annoying card that says flip a coin. If heads, you switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon when they're active. So its Pokepower is essentially Pokemon Catcher with the coin flip. So you can just be really annoying, drag up Pokemon for Flygon to knock out, or drag up Pokemon for Flygon to trap. That's kind of the goal. This is more of like a trapping deck. You kind of want to be annoying. Even if you're taking 6 prizes, you're being annoying the whole time. You're trying to like put your opponent in an awkward spot, so that way you can kind of run them out of resources with Flygon. And Metagross has also got decent attack. It's actually, I say it's decent, it's pretty bad. Extra Comet Punch does 50, but during your next turn, Extra Comet Punch does 100 if you use it consecutive times. But this attack can be reset if your opponent switches you out. If you switch out, it's not great. But he's a metal type, he has psychic resistance, there's like some benefits there. This is another card that I pulled when I was younger, so I just really wanted to build around it. This deck is a lot of fun, but it's not very strong compared to like Flyterra. Even Flygon Dusknoir is much better. But essentially we're a trapping deck, so we're being really annoying. Again, we play this Honchkrow, which puts extra Pokemon in play, because we can put knocked out Pokemon like Spiritomb back into play, and then try to get Flygon to trap them in the active spot. Metagross, his one benefit over Torterra is you don't have to be behind on prize cards to use your Gusting. So against decks like Gardevoir, you can get your Metagross out really fast and start bringing up their Claydol to be really annoying. And that's kind of how you win these harder matchups, is just by being really annoying and just gusting things up early. I also play Flygon here, the fighting guy again. This has a very specific use in this deck, which is countering Luxray GLX. Otherwise, this deck doesn't really have a good attacker to deal with Luxray, but this Flygon here hits for fighting weakness. And because of Expert Belt, the way it works is that Flygon hits for 80 damage if you attach a fighting energy to it during that turn. Expert Belt makes you hit 110 damage, or 100 damage, and then the Pokebody puts 1 damage counter on your opponent's active between turns. So you do 110. So that KOs Garchomp as well. So the fighting Flygon just here is a really efficient attacker, because otherwise you don't really have a good attacker against LuxChomp. But it's not awful. This deck is definitely like on the lower tier of Flygon decks, but I think it's really good if it pops off. If you're able to get your Metagross out really early and start being annoying with the gusting effects, this deck is really strong. If you flip tails on your Metagross's powers 8 times in a row like I do, then the deck is very bad. That's kind of how it goes. Next up we have GGAMU. This is another Gardevoir deck, but it plays differently. There's no Claydol in this deck. Instead, we're playing all of these Lake Trios. So we all know about Uxie. Uxie draws until you have 7 in hand. At this point, we've seen Gardevoir and Gallade. Those are nice cards as well. But this deck also plays a couple of unique cards that other decks don't. We have Mesprit. Once again, you turn off your opponent's Poke Powers. And Azelf makes it more expensive for basics to attack. So we're kind of a disruptive deck here. You can lock your opponent out of Pokepowers turn 1 and then start attacking with Gardevoir's Psychic Lock and just never let them use a Pokepower. The reason we play this combo, though, Azelf is really good, obviously, turns off our weakness. Uxie draws us more cards, makes sense. But then we also play this Mesprit here, which Mesprit has the Supreme Blast attack, which only works if you have all 3 of these level X's in play, but it does 200 damage and discards all energy. So essentially this attack gives you an out to decks like Steelix or decks like Magnezone, decks like Dialga-Chomp, these really bulky guys that otherwise Gardevoir has a hard time dealing with. You can just one-shot them with Mesprit. Again, we play Gardevoir Gallade with Gardevoir level X, but this deck also plays this Gardevoir right here, which has Psychic Connect, allows you to move an energy from one of your bench Pokemon to your active, a Psychic Energy. So essentially, because this Supreme Blast discards all energy attached to Mesprit, you're kind of screwed after you use the attack. It's like, okay, I can't use it again. But you can use Psychic Connect to recharge the attack again. Gardevoir's also got some decent attacks. Energy Burst does 20 plus 10 for each energy attached to both active. So it's a nice, like, you can stack a bunch of energy on you, swing for a lot of damage. And then Psychic Protection does 60 and turns off this Gardevoir's weakness. So just some really strong attacks on that guy as well. This deck is like it's a more aggressive, less reliable version of Gardevoir that tries to kind of like cheese the opponent out by just locking them earlier. And it's better against the tank deck since you have options like Mesprit to one-shot tanks when Gallade in the late game kind of gets a lot worse. He's not able to one-shot anymore after it's taken a bunch of prize cards. Next up we have Arceus. Arceus is a total pile. That do not build this deck. Whatever you do not build this deck. It is expensive, and it only keeps on getting more expensive because it is made entirely of ultra rare cards, pretty much, because you have all of these Arceuses in the deck. This is a super gimmicky deck. It is not good. It loses to any deck playing Dusknoir. It loses to Machamp. I mean, it loses to pretty much anything with any kind of counterplay, right? But it's got a lot of Arceus, doesn't it? Look at all these Arceus. Wow. It's sure got a lot of these Arceuses in it. There we go. There's the whole cast of Arceus. So, essentially, your goal is to fill your board with different types of Arceus early on and use the Ripple Swell attack, which accelerates. If you have 6 different Arceus types in play, you get to search your deck for an energy and attach them to all of your Arceus, basic energy. So you get 6 energy in play, and then you have access to all these attacks. Because when you level up into Arceus level X, Arceus can use the attacks of all of your Arceus in play as long as you have the energy on this Arceus. You may be thinking, my energy... the attack says I accelerate an energy to each of my Arceus. So I have 6 Arceus in play, and they all have like 1 energy on them, right? However, you have the Stadium card, Ultimate Zone, which lets you move an energy attached to one of your benched Pokemon to your active Arceus as often as you like. So essentially, you attach all those energies in play, but then you can move them around with Ultimate Zone. This deck also plays Beginning Door, which is a Master Ball for Arceus. You just search for any Arceus card. They tried to make this deck good, it's just not good. The best attacks in the deck are the Fighting one, which hits for 60 damage and does 10 to each your bench Pokemon, so it's like Donphan's Earthquake. Mainly, if you level up into Arceus level X using a Fighting type, you're still Fighting type, because you're whatever type you are in your previous level, so now you just hit weakness against Luxray, so that's really good. The Fire one is good, Fire Weakness is good, and also Bright Flame does 80, and you flip a coin of tails, discard 2 energy attached to Arceus, so it's a really powerful attack. Darkius over here is really good as well. If you're behind, this attack swings for 80 damage for only 2 energy, so really good there. Lightning Arceus lets you hit weakness against Gyarados, and you now swing for... This attack can do 30 and switch. You're never going to use that attack against Gyarados, but essentially this attack is actually really good because you can keep your energy in play if you whiff a good attack for the turn, and then switch into another Arceus that you can level up the next turn. I don't know, this deck's kind of a pile. It's got a lot of different Arceus. Don't be swayed by how pretty it is. This deck is not good. It is not worth building. The only reason I ended up building it is because I had most of the pieces already in my collection, because when I was younger I collected a lot of them, which made it a lot easier to build. Do not build this, though. It's a very expensive deck. Not worth it. It's not good. It's not fun. It is just a pile. I'll sell that deck one day. Next up, we have Gengar Kingdra Machamp. This deck is quite fun. It is kind of a Stage 2 box deck with a bunch of 1 energy Stage 2s. Machamp has Takeout for 1 energy, kills a basic. Kingdra has 60 for 1 energy, hits Water Weakness. But mainly it's here for Spray Splash, which puts 1 damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Again, really good spread damage. And the main attacker is Gengar, which is just, really annoying with Feigning Spell, really annoying Shadow Room with sniping 60 damage on one of your opponent's Pokemon. And essentially this is like a Stage 2 box. It's kind of like Gengar from 2009, where you can hit for 60 damage on something like a Claydol, and then Kingdra Prime can finish the Claydol off with Spray Splash. So you get a lot of damage spread all over your opponent's board. Really, really fun deck to play with lots of Stage 2s in it, and lots of flexibility. So we play Machamp level X, of course, take advantage of that. You play Gengar level X, take advantage of that. And this deck takes great advantage of multi-energy because it has 3 different energy types on its attacks, so that is really cool. This deck is really fun. It's not the highest tier deck ever, but I also think it's very underrated. Kingdra and Machamp is already a very good combo, but Gengar is just a much more stable attacker. You're not weak to Lightning on Gengar, which makes it actually stick around. So it's a pretty good deck. I think it's like tier 1.5. I wouldn't necessarily play it to a tournament just because it has some unreliable starts at times, but it's a really fun deck of just Stage 2 box attackers. So if you like Kingdra Machamp, give that deck a try as well. Next up, we have another Jumpluff deck. I promise this is the last Jumpluff. This one is LuxPluff. So essentially, this was the most iconic iconic Jumpluff deck of the 2010 season, where you pair Jumpluff with Luxray, which gives you Gust, and you pair it with Crobat, which gives you damage buffs, and you use Poketurn, which is somewhere in this deck, I promise. There it is. Poketurn, which picks up one of your Pokemon, picks up one of your Pokemon SP, so you can reuse Luxray's Blossosaur's effect, or reuse Crobat damage boost. Again, it's Jumpluff. I don't think we need to go through the details of this. It is just a third Jumpluff deck. I only own this deck because I legitimately just bought it off of a guy for like $200. So it's like, and it's a lot less blinked now, but there's still blinked cards in it because it was like fully blinked out. So it was pretty cheap for what it was, and I just really wanted another Jumpluff deck, I guess, even though I don't like Jumpluff. Next up, we have Yuta Kamatsuda's 2010 World Championship winning deck. I believe this is the deck. Yes, a while ago Taro sent a message in the chat that said his favorite World Championship deck is signed this one. So this is Yuta Kamatsuda's iconic Luxray Garchomp deck. LuxChomp, of course. But the unique thing about it is that it plays a Dialga line. So LuxChomp, obviously very aggressive, powerful, but Dialga gives the deck a way to turn off the opponent, slow them down a little, and Dialga also has a Psychic Resistance, so against Gardevoir, you have a bulkier attacker. But mainly Time Crystal is really good in combination with Warp Energy. What you can do is you can put the Dialga down to get the effect of Time Crystal and then switch it out of the active spot, right? So just a really annoying Dialga. This deck is really cool. It's really good too. There's some qualms I have with this specific list that was played because it's not playing Toxicroak in it, which is one of my favorite cards. But it's still a really, really powerful LuxChomp deck, and it was really consistent. And I think that's kind of what allowed Yuta Kamatsuda to win. He's got a lot of supporter cards in his deck, so he's got a very consistent setup. And he's got a very new supporter card that was not played that much at the time called Professor Oak's New Theory, which shuffles and draws 6 cards. Nowadays, we know this card is very good. At the time, it was not as respected as it should have been. And part of getting this card on the map was Yuta Kamatsuda winning Worlds with it. So really strong shuffle draw. He had a lot of supporters in the deck and like full copies of cards like Energy Gain just to find it as soon as possible. His deck is incredibly consistent, incredibly strong, a little less tacked than I'd like it, but it's still a very strong deck, and it's honestly, this is one of the most beautiful Worlds decks of all time. So if you have a chance to get the Worlds decks from this format, they're so nice. Compared to like other Worlds decks, the fact that they put the Heart Gold Soul Silver energy cards in here, like right there, the Ampharos energy and the Steelix energy, like these just make these decks so memorable. In retrospect, it's such a beautiful deck. Again, like I said, not as tech as I like, because I just like having lots of techs in my SP decks, but still really, really strong deck. Consistency is definitely underrated. I think that's what allowed him to win, is just that his deck is so consistent at setting up. Next up, we have our first like actually bad deck. Like, Tangrowth was not great, Hippowdon, not great, Amphaseano not great. This deck is like actively really bad. We have the Metagross deck, the Quad Metagross deck. Essentially, this deck plays 4 Metagross, so you have multiple chances to gust your opponent with Magnetic Reversal, and your goal is just to be really annoying and always gust and attack whatever you'd like. But this Metagross is not a very good attacker. It is pretty bulky though, 120 HP. We can make that bigger with extra. We can make that bigger with Special Metal Energy, which makes us take 10 less. So against Gardevoir, this guy's actually pretty bulky. Gardevoir can't knock it out. This deck is really bad though. It has no chance against LuxChomp because LuxChomp resets the effect of your attack, extra Comet Punch, and it struggles against pretty much anything that's not like a slow setup deck. So what I've started to try to do with this deck is just include random control attacks like this Absol right here, which discards random cards from the opponent's hand, and of course my favorite Ambipom, which moves energy around your opponent's board, just to try to like trap an opponent's Pokemon active and just be really annoying. That's the goal. I don't think there's any real potential here of the deck becoming good, but it's something funny. I have considered pairing this with Machamp to make the deck have like a Machamp plus Gusting option, which would be pretty cool. But it's not very good. This guy is also not very good, but he is very, very, very pretty and very cool. This Metagross right here makes each of Pokemon in play have 20 less HP, which is just a really interesting Pokebody. And his attack is not very good. Essentially, this guy, you can set up a bunch of damage with these Metagross. Their attacks are not very good, but you can hit for like 50 damage against like a Uxie, Azelf, or Mesprit. Leave them with 20 left, and then at some point in the game, you can play down this guy right here and take a knockout. Because Metagross swings for 50 damage or 100 with extra Comet Punch, its numbers are just always off. Because like the numbers you really want to hit in this format are like 60 and 80 and like 110, and he's just missing all of those numbers. So having this Metagross to like clean up all the KOs in the late game is very helpful. Because you're usually getting a bunch of like KOs you don't actually take. That's why this deck really, really struggles against LuxChomp. Not only does your attack suck against LuxChomp, but also you struggle because the Metagross just like you don't take a KO and then just pick up the Pokemon. Next up, we're down to our final row. So we have 8 more decks of 2010. So we're getting there. I'm trying to go a little bit faster just to kind of get through, get through the decks today. Don't want to keep everyone all evening, but I appreciate those who have stuck with throughout this time. So let's just get these out. Next up, I don't think Taro is with us anymore. He probably had to go to work or something, but we have my favorite deck of this format, which is Gengar C. So let's just find Garchomp. He's in here somewhere. There he is. So this deck pairs the 2 best sniping attackers in the format, Gengar from Stormfront with Garchomp level X. Essentially, Gengar has a very easy-to-use free sniping attack, and Garchomp has a more costly sniping attack, but it does more damage. So you can be really annoying on your opponent. You can deny KOs by picking up Garchomps, of course, because you run the full SP engine, like Poketurn in this deck. And Energy Gain, like all of these, Cyrus, like you still run all of the SP cards, you just also have a Gengar line in the deck with Rare Candy to set it up. So you get to use all the different SP tricks except for Power Spray. This deck does not play Power Spray at all, which is interesting. But it's just you can put a lot of damage, you get a lot of board control in your opponent. Just like 2009, Gengar is a little short on the knockouts for things like Claydol, but you can, of course, use Crobat, which is in the deck, to fix math for your knockouts. And we also have Gengar level X, which is a really good card in this deck because Gengar level X levels down your opponent and puts them into range for your attacks of Garchomp, or for range of, maybe like your Toxicroak, which is in this deck. One of the most interesting things about this deck is that it only plays Psychic Energy and Double Colorless Energy. So it's a bit of a weird like mix-mash of like SP stuff and non-SP stuff, but of the SP stuff you can only use the SP cards that can attack with either Psychic Energy or Colorless Energy. So you have to be more selective, right? Like you can only use the ones that can attack for these types of energy. So you're a little more limited in your attacking pool, but you still get to use all of my favorites. And you still get to use all the best support cards like Bronzong, and the best support attackers like Toxicroak and Roserade, which attacks for colorless, Ambipom attacks for colorless, right? It's just a really interesting deck. Yeah, this is like definitely my favorite deck of the format, though. It's so fun to play. It's very aggressive. It's very powerful. But it's also very fun to play. It's also got a lot of different counter plays. One of the most interesting things is when you play this deck, your opponent doesn't know that you don't play Power Spray. So you open up an SP deck and they're starting to play around the possibility of you playing Power Spray to start canceling their Poke Powers, but you don't play it at all. So you kind of get them with a little bit of like a fake out. It's one of those decks that people don't really respect as much nowadays, but it's a very strong deck, like definitely a tier 1.5 deck. It's just kind of been forgotten nowadays in favor of like, Cursegar, which is just a stronger Gengar deck, but less fun, I think. But it's my favorite deck of the format. I love Gengar Garchomp, Gengar C. Very fun. Zacharoni asks, do you enjoy the playstyle of skipping rare candy skipping stage 2s or stage 1 Pokemon? Yes. I really like especially old rare candy. The thing is that basics are just so efficient in Pokemon. Basics are just so efficient in Pokemon that you just have to be able to like skip evolutions in some way. Otherwise, if you've played like like base era, the evolutions are so bad because the basics are just so efficient. Not only did it take less deck space, but you can just put them down immediately. It doesn't matter how weak their attacks are. Unless basics are doing like 20 damage and the evolutions are doing 200, the basics are just so efficient that I enjoy having cards like Rare Candy around to help set them up, yes. And you also ask, how does an opponent play around Power Spray? So your opponent, when they're playing around Power Spray, a lot of times they'll sequence their board differently. They're not going to like make a really greedy play. Like if you know your opponent doesn't play Power Spray, you can get rid of every single card in your hand and then try to like play down a Uxie and draw 7 cards, right? If you think your opponent's going to play Power Spray, you don't do that. You're like, oh, my opponent plays Power Spray. If I do this and they get rid of and they stop my Uxie from going off, I lose the game. So there's different things like that. It comes up a lot where your opponent just thinks you're going to have a Power Spray, but you never do. I'm considering adding one to the deck, though, just to have the opportunity to use Power Spray at least once. Next deck we have is another really bad deck. It is Tyranitar with Alakazam. So Alakazam has the Power Cancel. Once again, you discard 2 cards from your hand and you stop your opponent using a power. What this does in this deck is that you discard Darkness Energy. And Tyranitar says that after your opponent uses a Pokepower, you can attach a Dark Energy from the discard pile to Tyranitar. So your goal is to cancel your opponent's power. You don't even let them use it, but because it counts as it being used even if you cancel it, you get to discard Dark Energy and then attach it to Tyranitar. And Tyranitar just has some really good attacks. Grind does 20 for each energy attached to Tyranitar, so we play double colorless energy as well to just beef our damage up. And Spinning Tail is 5 darkness energy spread 30 to all your opponent's Pokemon. Tyranitar was really good when it first came out. In Stormfront, this card is a beast. It is scary. However, it got bad really fast, and it's not good in this format. One of the reasons is Nidoqueen, which heals your opponent's board, so the spread attack doesn't really stick that well. And the other reason is, of course, Toxicroak. So most decks have a fighting Pokemon like Donphan or Machamp or Toxicroak, which just easily deals with Tyranitar. We do play Bubble Coat to help prevent that against LuxApe. This deck can really only beat LuxApe and almost nothing else in the format. And you beat them by putting on a Bubble Coat so they can't one-shot your Tyranitar with their Toxicroak. But otherwise, I hate to say it, this Tyranitar, as cool as it is, Darkness Drive is one of the coolest effects in the format. It's definitely just power crept out of the format. He's definitely too small to play with the big boys nowadays, unfortunately. If you want to play this guy, not even 2009, you can't really play him that much. You got to play him when he first came out in 2008. However, thankfully, they gave us an upgraded Tyranitar. A little bit less cool in the effects department, but Tyranitar Prime has 160 HP. He is really, really big. This is a new deck, Tyranitar Prime. It's not the same deck as the other one. Tyranitar Prime is like an upgraded version of Tyranitar Stormfront. He has more HP and he does more damage more efficiently. Darkness Howl does 20 to each Pokemon in play that is not a dark type. So it's a nice spread attack. Spread isn't the best in this format, but because it's only 1 energy, it's a really easy attack to just launch off early in the game to get some chip damage on the board. You do damage Pokemon that are not darkness energy, however, Nidoqueen heals your own Pokemon, so you do 20 to your own Pokemon as well that aren't dark, but Nidoqueen will heal them up. I also play Exploud. This is a Stefan Tobacco tech. Exploud says that each of your Pokemon have no weakness, so Tyranitar Prime is really good, but again, fighting weakness is terrible. You're weak to Gallade, you're weak to Donphan, you're weak to Toxicroak G. There's so many different fighting types around, you have to have a way to deal with that in some way, and my way of dealing with it is playing this Exploud, which turns off your weakness. Tyranitar's also got 2 really powerful attacks. Power Claw does 60 and goes through all effects on the opponent, so if the opponent has Special Metal, you can still swing for full damage with Power Claw, it goes through all effects of it. And Megaton Tail does 120 damage and discards the top 3 cards of your deck. This is the main attack you're going to use most games. Most games, this deck plays 3 copies of Spiritomb, really heavy count of Spiritomb. Your goal is to just set up behind Spiritomb, since you have 3 of them, and then once you get Tyranitar online, and Exploud, and Nidoqueen, which we can get them all out with Spiritomb, once you get those out, you just start attacking with Tyranitar, for 1-hit KOs with Megaton Tail, and you get a second Tyranitar online. That way you can use Moonlight Stadium to switch between them. So Megaton Tail is one of the most powerful attacks in the entire format. Obviously, discarding cards from your own deck is very scary, but you can 1-hit KO literally anything in the format if you build up enough energy, or the energies, right? We should talk about that. This deck plays Special Darkness Energy. This is a card you haven't seen, I don't think, before now. Special Darkness Energy makes your dark Pokemon do 10 more damage. So now Megaton Tail does 130. Now Megaton Tail does 140. If we attach Expert Belt, now Megaton Tail does 160. So Tyranitar Prime is just a huge Pokemon that does a ton of damage, and you just try to prevent your opponent from KOing it. And Nidoqueen will heal your Pokemon, and you can just switch between your Tyranitars to attack. So Tyranitar, really, really cool. I love playing this deck. It is a lot of fun. It's very simple and kind of linear, but it's also just really powerful, and it's a fun attacker. The Exploud is also interesting because he's got good attacks. Knockback does 40, and you force the opponent to switch. This does 40 damage and 80 damage to a Garchomp C, so you one-hit KO the baby Garchomp C. And Hyper Beam does 60, with Chime 2 weakness, KOs a Garchomp C level X. So this has got two pretty decent attacks. And Hyper Beam also has a coin flip, where if you get heads, you discard an energy from your opponent. Every once in a while, you really get an attack. You really get a chance to use this Hyper Beam to like discard an energy, and it can be really relevant, just for being really annoying to your opponent. Currently, the one thing I'm missing is this deck does not have a Psychic Energy, because I literally don't have one of these cool-looking Psychic Energies laying around. I want to add a Psychic Energy so I can start attacking with Nidoqueen. So once I get that, Nidoqueen will also be an attacker. This deck will definitely benefit from having multiple attackers, because Tyranitar is really good, but it's also very expensive to attack with. Next up, we have Shenlock. This is a locking deck. I waited super long to build Shenlock. This is, what, my 30-something deck in this format, right? 31st deck in this format, because Shenlock is obnoxious. It's a very mean deck. Essentially, Sableye has the Impersonate attack, which is used in the Gyarados deck to find supporter cards to help set up your board. In this deck, you find supporter cards to ruin your opponent. So let's just grab out some of the relevant pieces we'll need. These guys are relevant. This is relevant. And there's a lot of pieces in this deck. Essentially, we are playing a lock deck now. We are giving up all the niceness of regular LuxApe of just being really aggressive and powerful, and we are just playing full-on lock. Where's my judge? There's a judge here somewhere. There's the card that I need, and then I need a judge, which is in this deck somewhere, I promise. There it is. So, using Sableye, you can search the deck for supporter cards. You can either get cards like Cyrus to set up your own board, or you can get one of these two supporters right here. Judge obviously shuffles each player's hand, their deck draws 4, really annoying disruption effect. We also have Cyrus's Initiative, which you flip 2 coins, and for each heads, you look at your opponent's hand and you choose a card there and put it on the bottom of their deck. So it's hand control. You want to put your opponent to 4 cards in the hand with Judge, and then you can play a Cyrus's Initiative and get rid of the good cards in their hand. You also have Looker. You look at your opponent's hand, and if their hand is really good, you force them to shuffle draw 5. It also lets you shuffle draw 5, though. You get a choice of it. So unlike Judge, you don't have to get rid of your whole hand to make Looker work. Your goal is to use Cyrus's Initiative and get rid of your opponent's good cards out of their hand. It's really annoying, and it's really hard to beat if you're an evolution deck, especially because Sableye, with a Special Darkness energy, his second attack, Overconfident, if the opponent has fewer remaining HP than Sableye, the attack does 40. With Special Darkness, plus 10, that's 50. You're now KOing cards like Spiritomb and evolving Pokemon like Ghastly, right? Like Hoppips, all these like weaker evolving Pokemon, and Spiritomb, which helps set your opponent up against SP decks. Sableye with a Special Darkness energy will take a knockout. Your goal is to lock down your opponent, and then you always want to have Power Sprays on hand. That way you can stop your opponent from ever setting up once you have locked them down. Because Cyrus Initiative, you'll put the good cards in their hand to the bottom, and then you want to make sure they can't like draw Uxie. One way to make sure they do not draw is to use Chatot, which when you play it down, it lets you look at the top 4 cards of your opponent's deck and rearrange them however you like. This effect is absolutely broken. It is so disgusting because you can ensure that they don't draw the lock for at least like 1 or 2 turns. And then it's also got an attack where it's a free attack where it searches for your deck for an item card and it gets rid of Chatot. So you can find another Power Spray. It gets Chatot off the board, shuffles into the deck so you can reuse it later. You can also find Verse Seeker, which is a card I play in this deck to allow me to reuse all these disruptive supporters. This deck is really nasty. One thing this deck also does very well is for its SP attackers of choice. Once you lock down your opponent's hand, it's very easy to overwhelm your board with Blaziken and Garchomp. Blaziken, again, Glass Cannon attacker, but even more relevant to the deck, Luring Flame. Again, you can bring up a Pokemon from the bench and burn them. Against Claydol, you can bring up a Claydol and burn it, make it so it can't use its Cosmic Power, and now you've locked down your opponent from getting out of the hand lock. It's also got Jet Shoot, just a really powerful 80 damage attack, and when the opponent doesn't have cards in hand, it's really hard to respond. Of course, we play Toxicroak, another efficient attacker. And Garchomp, the best SP attacker, of course. 80 snipe shuts down your opponent. You can snipe their evolutions out of play before they get them set up. You can snipe Claydolls out of play so they can't draw out of the hand lock. This deck is absolutely nasty. It's why I waited so long to build this. It's one of my least favorite decks. It's really fun to play when you get like a matchup with this against another big basic deck. But against evolution decks, this deck is brutal. It's definitely not fun. It is a very strong deck, though. Shenlock and Sableye are definitely two of the best decks, like probably top 10. They're not in the top 5, I'd say, but they're really strong against some decks. They struggle against Regigigas, though, which is very fun. So if you ever want to watch these decks get humiliated, play Regigigas and just overwhelm them, because they can't donk your Regigigas. Next up, we have the Final Worlds deck. We have Michael Byron's Gyarados here. This is a Gyarados deck like my 2009 one. It plays the Luxray for Gust, Sableye to very innocently find our supporter cards. He's not doing any donking this time. And we play Crobat, which lets us do more damage. I'm not going to go over the whole Gyarados deck because we've talked about 3 Gyarados decks today already, but this deck uniquely plays Cycle Energy, which forces your opponent to switch, so you can get Gyarados a nice cheap attack. I do wish this deck played Regice, which is a really strong card as well that forces your opponent to switch, but you can use it every single turn, so it's a lot stronger in my opinion. It also lets you discard cards so you don't get bricked by like Judge. 3 more decks left. We're almost done. My voice is going out. Next up we have another one of my silly decks. To be fair, this list is not mine. This list is from my friend Nolo. This is Rat Shock. It is a deck using Raichu. Now, do not convince yourself that this deck is good. It is definitely not good. It is a fun combo deck that I built because I have a ton of decks for this format. This is not a deck you want to build as like one of your first decks and take on your opponent's Gardevoir or something. Essentially, this deck is really annoying. We have something unique again. We're playing that 2-2 split of Stadium like I talked about in Donphan Prime. We play 2 Broken Time Space so we can get the early setup. But we also play Sunny Shore City Gym to turn off our lightning weakness. Very relevant. And in this deck, we play Raichus. We also play this fun Pikachu. This Raichu right here accelerates 2 lightning energy from the deck to one of your Pokemon for free. And has an attack where you discard all lightning energy attached to this Pokemon. And it does 30 for each one you discard. So you can kind of see the combo here. You get energy out of the deck. Usually attach it to like a benched Raichu. And then bring the benched Raichu up for a one-shot. Really powerful. There's also this Raichu here. He's just a really efficient attacker. 2 energy, 100 damage is just a really efficient damage output. And it discards all energy attached to Raichu, but that's fine. This deck has ways of recycling energy. One of those is an energy pickup. This coin flip card here, you flip a coin. If heads, you get an energy from your discard pile and attach it to one of your Pokemon. So you can spam Thunderbolt by just getting energy back with energy pickup. So it's a really efficient way to just get prizes against decks like LuxApe. The most creative thing this deck can do, however, is using Raichu level X, which, when you level up into Raichu, during that turn, if you use a Voltage Shoot attack, you may also use another attack. So you have to do it the turn you play Raichu level X, but you use the Voltage Shoot attack, which discards 2 lightning energy from your hand, and then you choose one of your opponent's benched Pokemon, or you choose one of your opponent's Pokemon in play, and you do 80 damage to it. So, need 2 energy, you discard them for Voltage Shoot. But it discards them from hand, so it doesn't discard energy off Raichu, so you can still, because you still have 3 energy on Raichu, you can use an attack like, let's just say Explosive Thunder, and discard all the energy attached to Raichu. Let's just say he has 3 energy on him. You can do, let's just do that, and let's get an Expert Belt just to show what this deck does at its best. So let's just say this turn I leveled up my Raichu. I'm using Voltage Shoot to do 80 damage to one of my opponent's bench Pokemon. And now I can also use Explosive Thunder to do 110 to active. Essentially, this deck is just a silly gimmick deck that can take 2 knockouts in one turn. Because of this, it is able to sometimes cheese decks like LuxApe. You can just take a prize every single turn if you get lucky on your coin flips and just be a little silly. It's not a very good deck, though. Probably the most creative thing this deck does is with this Minun and Plusle combo. Minun is like Pheasantipede EX. If one of your Pokemon is knocked out, you can use minus charge and you draw 2 cards. It helps make your combos a lot easier with the level X card. And Plusle says if one of your Pokemon is knocked out, you can get 2 energy from the discard pile. This deck, because all of its attacks discard energy, it will run out of energy. So you need this Plusle, and you need the energy recharge or energy pickup card to get your energy back from the discard pile. It's got a lot of rats. It's kind of shocking. Let's see, look at all these rats. Yeah, that's a lot of rats, right? And it's kind of shocking. So that's why it's called Rat Shock. It's just a nickname I gave to the deck. I didn't create this list. It's something I took from my friend Nolo, who made this list off of a James G list, but it's a silly rogue deck. Don't build it unless you have a bunch of decks like I do, but it's a silly rogue deck, if nothing else. When you get so many 2010 decks, sometimes you just really want to play with a card, and that you use that excuse to build a silly deck. Next up, we have my last LuxChamp, I promise, for now. Last LuxChamp for now. We have LuxChamp and a Raikou Legend. Let's just find the LuxChamp combo and the Entei Raikou Legend combo. So, LuxChamp we've talked about, very aggressive. Shout out to Hole Punched Corner Missing Luxray. I love this guy. $2 Luxray off eBay, very cool. Essentially, LuxChamp very aggressive, easy to take prizes in the early game, set your opponent up for a lot of problems. But Entei Raikou Legends is a really interesting card. It gives you a attacker that hits fire weakness, and it also can use that Thunderfall attack. Remember, Thunderfall does 80 to each Pokemon in play with a power. Now, this seems pretty bad because LuxChamp has a lot of Pokemon with powers. That's why LuxChamp struggles against Gardevoir so much, right? Like, if you look at a typical LuxChamp board, we got like so many Pokepowers, it's crazy. Also, the attack on Thunderfall takes multiple energy cards. How do we get this to work? The answer is Bronzong. If you have an energy, let's just say I have an energy on my Garchomp, I can move an energy over with Galactic Switch to the Entei Raikou Legend. You can attach, and now you have your thing. But if you look at this board, if I use Thunderfall right now, my opponent gets 2 prize cards. So what am I doing here? Well, because we're an SP deck and we're not playing on the same fair terms as everyone else, you just play Poke Turn. You just pick up these guys, right? So that way you don't give up prize cards. It's LuxChamp, but it has a crazy late game finisher that also hits for fire weakness. Essentially, that's what the deck is. Without going into too much, because I'm losing my voice. Hello, Curb TCG. Great to see you. Great to see you. You're just at the end of the stream where we have one more deck to show off for this evening. I have gone through all 35 now 2010 decks. We have one more 2010 deck though, and then I will end the stream. The last deck is the most recent deck. Shout out to anyone who stuck around this long. Holy cow. Hopefully if you didn't get to catch the stream when it came out, you should be able to watch the VOD later. We have Cybergon. Now this is a new deck. I did not invent the concept. James G has built with these guys before. However, the list is very uniquely different from his, because I like to play my Flygon and my Magnezone decks differently. Now his version of Cybergon is more of a prize trade deck, right? You have, you have right here, this Magnezone right here. James loves this guy. He does 120 damage to the opponent if you discard the Lightning and Metal. We've talked about him before. He's a very good attacker. However, I found that it's kind of hard to trade with like LuxChamp because this deck doesn't have a lot of ways to remove your weakness. It only has one way. So it's kind of hard to trade attackers with like a faster deck, right? If you just spam this guy, they knock him out. You try to give him another guy, knock him out, and they knock you out. You're not winning that trade. You're a stage 2 with 4 energy, right? So I'm playing my iconic combo of 4 different Magnezones. We already talked about a lot of these, but just a reminder, this guy right here can accelerate energy from the discard pile back into play. And this guy right here gives free retreat to your Pokemon. Now, it seems irrelevant. Why would you give free retreat to your Pokemon when you're also playing Flygon, which gives free retreat to your Pokemon if it has the basic energy attached? Right? So these guys both give free retreat to your Pokemon when they have energy attached to them. Well, Magnezone gives them to your Pokemon with metal energy attached. Flygon has to have the energy attached to it. Well, one thing is it gives us more options, so we get to double down on the free retreat stuff. But also, you have to have the energy attached to Flygon. It means it's not attached to your other Pokemon like Magnezone, which is kind of difficult because then you'd have to move it off. Remember, this guy can move the energy around the board. So it's kind of difficult. The main thing I wanted to play this for, though, is because I wanted to play Special Metal. His list does not play any Nidoqueen, and he does not play Special Metal. I think these cards are too good to play without. So I play Special Metal. That way I can take advantage of the bulky side. And essentially, one of the things that this deck does exceptionally well is it uses Cyber Shock and Flygon to try to steal your opponent's turns. So you can, remember, Cyber Shock paralyzes the opponent if you discard energy, and then you can get them back. And even though you take damage from the Super Connectivity Pokepower, Nidoqueen heals that off. Also Flygon, another guy that really likes stealing turns with attacks like Sandwall, and then you mill the opponent out. If your Flygon gets damaged, you just hide it on the bench and start attacking with Magnezone. This deck is essentially a master of stealing turns. That's kind of what it does. It's kind of just a deck that tries to switch between these two really strong attackers and just kind of run the opponent out of resources while taking knockouts and healing its own board. So that's Cybergon. It's still a work in progress. I just added a Rainbow Energy to the deck so Nidoqueen can attack, and I've liked that thus far. Over a basic fighting, you need basic fighting to some extent, so Flygon can still do the trapping thing, but it's less relevant in this deck, so I'd rather have Rainbow Energy so Nidoqueen can also attack and Flygon can use the trapping strategy. Jonathan asks, I'm building 4 to 6 2010 decks for my league just to have fun rather than be competitive. Which decks would you recommend that balance fun with the spirit of the format? So the 4 Worlds decks, they're all good. Those archetypes in general. So Gyarados is really fun. You want a LuxApe deck. In any 2010 Gauntlet, you need LuxApe. That's the most iconic deck. You should get a Gardevoir deck of some kind. The Worlds deck is a pretty good Gardevoir deck as well. And there's also the Worlds deck with Jumpluff. Now, I don't like Jumpluff as much because I think a lot of people think it's fun. I think it's not fun because it's kind of in the opposite of the spirit of the format because it only uses 1 attack ever. It's a very fast and aggressive deck trying to just kind of run your opponent over. Less like a 2010 deck, but still, Jumpluff is pretty good. Those are good 4 starting archetypes to go with. Past that, the other archetypes that I'd consider, if you're going to build, let's just get our 4 decks out so for reference here. So you're going to want a LuxApe for your Gauntlet. So I'll just take out my LuxApe right here. LuxApe is the most iconic deck of the format. Very fun, difficult deck to play, but also by far the most iconic deck, and it gets really good games. Gyarados, you don't have to have Floatzel like mine. You can just play the Worlds list if you want. You'll want Gyarados. That is another really iconic and powerful deck from the season. We'll get out the Jumpluff. Jumpluff is a fast and aggressive deck, really easy to play. Gyarados as well, really easy to play deck. Just lets you like run over your opponent sometimes with Jumpluff, and Gyarados is a little bit more like balanced, I guess. So you want those 3, and you'll want Gardevoir. I'll take out my own Gardevoir, but also, like I said, the Worlds decks for this year, the World Championship printed decks like they do every single year, those are also pretty good. But Gardevoir Gallade is arguably one of the strongest decks of this format. I think that you'll want Gardevoir Gallade. Now, if you want to add 2 more decks to the format, the 2 that I always try to recommend to people are Dialga-Chomp, because Dialga-Chomp is arguably the best deck in the modern format. Dialga-Chomp is a very grindy deck. It's a very hard to play against sometimes because it kind of locks you out. But it's still a very competitive deck. It has the spirit of the format. It was good at the time, and it's still good now. So I recommend Dialga-Chomp. It is a bit expensive if you're building with real cards, but that's with any 2010 deck. If you're building with real cards, it's going to be a little bit expensive. So I recommend that as like a 5th deck. And then as a 6th deck, you get a few options. You could either play Cursegar, which is like a trainer lock hit and run deck. That's very iconic that year. Took 3rd at Worlds. That's a good deck to close out a Gauntlet. You could also play Flygon Torterra. Flygon Torterra is like a... we're going to move these over. That way we can fit more here. Flygon Torterra, I've talked about this in this live stream, so you can go back and watch the VOD later if you want like my descriptions of the deck. Flygon Torterra is like a tanking healing deck that also kind of locks the opponent out. And you can get a chance to like deck the opponent out. It's hard to play against, but it's really fun. We'll move these over. So you start with those 4, and then you either have Dialga, Torterra, Gengar, or the last one I'd recommend as well is just another fast deck. I think that Kingdra is really fun, and it gets some really good games against LuxApe and Jumpluff, and it can keep up with those faster decks, but also kind of does its own thing. So Kingdra, another like really fast deck. So if you're going to build a gauntlet, start with the 4 archetypes on the left. You can just buy the World Championship lists, and that will save you time and money. So since you don't have to put them together yourself. And then if you want to add to the gauntlet, I always say the 5th deck should probably be Dialga, and your 6th deck should be like Kingdra, Flygon Torterra, or Gengar. Those are really, really fun decks. You kind of get the core of the format in those. But you're not going to have like super unfun games by playing like... There's a couple meta decks like Shenlock that just aren't very fun to play against, right? So... and you get other decks like Regigigas that are really cool, but have really terrible matchups against some decks. So, like Gardevoir that has a terrible matchup against it. So this kind of gives you an even playing field of like the best decks that are also fun to play. So I hope that helps. It's a little bit of a long outro there, Jonathan. But yeah, start with these 4, then work on to like these guys. Anyway, thank you to everyone who showed up for this stream. It's about 3 hours long now. My voice is definitely really dry because I just talked for the last 3 hours. However, I really appreciate everyone showing up, and I appreciate support on the channel as well. And did T-Tar Prime get talked about? Yes. You should, Poke Trainer Hub, you should go watch my video on Tyranitar Prime. I did a deck profile on it about half a year ago, and that video is really, really good on Tyranitar Prime. Talks a lot about the deck. Yeah, I appreciate everyone sticking with me. I do have a donate button on the channel now, so if you ever feel like donating, don't feel obligated to. I just would appreciate helping recoup the cost. But I do also make money off of YouTube ad revenue. Even if it's not the most anymore, I do still make money off those, so never feel obligated to give. Thank you all so much for coming to this stream. If you want to watch the VOD, it will be up later in my live streams playlist. And please go watch the new Flygon video if you have not already. I am really proud of that video. I really liked how it came out in the end. And yeah, next time I do a live stream, I'll either do another tabletop games, or we'll start talking about 2011 onwards for my... Because we still have a lot to cover in my deck collection, believe it or not. We've gotten through about a quarter of it. A little more than a quarter. Like a third of my deck collection. Anyway, that's all for this live stream. I need to go recover my voice.